If you were a mad scientist and you wanted to crash a meteor into the Earth and wipe it all away, capital A, all away, how would you do that? It's a very silly hypothetical, but I promise you it is relevant to today's topic. Well, if you wanted to do that, the first step is, of course, you'll need help. It's a monumental task. You need experts in the fields that you don't understand so you can outsource the educational things. And you also have to convince them, all these scientists or whatever, that crashing a meteor into the Earth is a fantastic idea. But then you need more people, right? Not experts. You need the experts to plan the course of the meteor and do all that stuff, but you also need experts to build the ship or the drone that's going to redirect some spacebound object towards us. You need a whole economy to be able to support those people and all the factory workers that are producing these things. And all of a sudden you realize the simple dream of crashing a meteor into the Earth has grown into a rather large enterprise. And it just keeps getting bigger until it's achieved, until the meteor hits Earth. Now, why do I tell this ridiculous story about a mad scientist? Well, the slaves to darkness as we know them, as the predominant enemy in the mortal realms, the darkness that consumed whole worlds, all began because one man cursed his god and wanted to wipe it all away. All being the universe. It is the story of Archaon, the Everchosen. And although others have come before him, he's not the first Everchosen, that's a title that's bestowed. He is the one that has gone further than any other. He pulled together the most powerful artifacts of the old world and then destroyed the planet itself with the power of chaos. And yet, life persisted, and therefore, so does the torment. And Archaon the Everchosen, Ender of Worlds, was brought from the realm of chaos with a new task. Claim the mortal realms in the black gauntlet of the Chaos Gods. He is a man who hates the divine, the false gods of order, Sigmar of course the most, but he also despises the cursed pantheon that he plays like a fiddle. He takes what he wants from them. He leads them on and then just to spite one another. He keeps the Chaos Gods quarreling while reaping the rewards of their eternal avarice. They always want more, it's never enough, I'll give you whatever if I could just stick it to Korn or Nurgle or whatever. Because just like our scientist in our initial story, he has a bigger goal. The goal to end it all. No gods, no divinity. Just a land of absolute chaos where might makes right, knowing full well that he has already established himself as the mightiest of all. A man who could defeat a god and make others pause. Today we are talking about Archaon, the 8 points, the Varen Spire, and more as we continue our exploration of the Slaves to Darkness Battle Tome for 4th edition. Now, some people have requested comments on like books that you can read further, and I'm going to start trying to incorporate that as much as I can into my videos. I have a few shout outs here for you. And really how I want to organize this chat to talk about Archaon is essentially more the newer stuff, where his armies stand, what his goals are, and then talk about his home base at the 8 points, which has been a fantastic battlefront in the past, and, spoiler, might be shaping up to be again. And of course, that's where his seat of power is located, the Varen Spire. And I want to end it all with a chat about the vanguard, Abraia, and so on. We're going to talk more about the Warriors of Chaos in general, possibly along with Eternus in another video. But these are Archaon's best and brightest, right? His home base with his elite guard of the vanguard, one of whom is Abraia. And so I want to start our discussion with the man himself, Archaon. Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse, Ender of Worlds, Everchosen. He has a lot of names. I'm going to give you my best sum up. If you are someone who was not around during Warhammer Fantasy battles, I'm going to bring you up to speed. Archaon, in short, is a Chaos Lord character from the old world with a personal vendetta against the god he formerly served, Sigmar. Since casting off those shackles, he rebelled against the divine and sees the ruinous powers as a means to his personal end, which is total domination or destruction of everything. He is a man who'd rather see existence burn than live under the thumb of false gods and lies. The old world, meaning the setting of Warhammer Fantasy battles, concluded in the End Times campaign with Archaon winning, he unleashed the full winds of chaos, raised colossal armies, and essentially broke the planet. In the long process of that, he acquired a ton of chaos artifacts of power that have only augmented his abilities more. These are all the named things that he has on his war scroll: his fancy sword, his armor, the eye of Ed Sheeran. Not to mention the same boons of chaos that he demands of the chaos gods, while bowing to none of them. Over millennia, he has asserted himself as a paragon of hate and evil. He just will not die. He has immortality essentially in the palm of his hand because he's so good at what he does. Every one of the gods is willing to extend his life to let him keep doing it. Now, I will say, if you want to know more about him in the old world, specifically, his personal vendetta against the gods and his kind of inner monologue, I would definitely suggest you check out Archaon, Everchosen by Rob Sanders. Like I said, it's an old world setting book about his motivations and thought processes. I have enough trouble keeping up with AOS lore, so doing a full old world breakdown to me seems a bit daunting. But what I want to focus on in this video is getting us caught up with him in the mortal realms, right? What's been going on with our boy? Because this is the first non-Skaven chaos book that we have, and while the Skaven Doom ushered in the addition, it is overall the Hour of Ruin, meaning that's what we're calling this meta-narrative, an overall period of chaos ascendancy. Now, I have other videos talking about Archaon in greater detail about his background and stuff. You can see my playlist on Wrath of the Everchosen or the Realmgate Wars to see some of the more pivotal moments that have brought us here. But the last real story beat we left off with Archaon before 4th edition was that really he was harvesting Varanite to try and melt open the Gates of Azir back in Broken Realms Morathi. Unless there's something I'm just completely blanking on, he didn't feature too prominently outside of that particular book, which Archaon wasn't really in. It was more just that was his plans going on. And in Wrath of the Everchosen, he starred in, but he didn't do a ton in the era of the Beast, is what I'm saying, the last kind of meta-narrative we had. However, that began to change towards the very, very rat tail end of that story arc, as we were getting little breadcrumbs that the Skaven were up to no good, but the fuller picture of what was going on didn't become clear until the last Dawnbringers book, meaning the last campaign book in the era of the Beast. The events and stories leading up to the immediate moment of the Skaven Doom explosion. So let's take a look at what's been going on in the background. So, behind the scenes, Archaon's great game amongst the Chaos Gods took a new turn. The Great Horned Rat had come to the bargaining table of Archaon, and the Everchosen saw a chance to change the great game forever. The idea was very simple. Archaon would assist the Great Horned Rat in their machinations to tear open the heart of Akshi, and his, meaning Archaon's agents, would kind of assist in facilitating all this thing. The results of the explosions did two things. One, it completely changed the course of the fighting in the mortal realms, because now the Chaos forces have the initiative. And that's kind of how I think about, I call them meta-narratives. It's like, what's the overall theme or the branding of this particular edition, this story? Last one was the Era of the Beast, where it's all in Gur. The Hour of Ruin is what we're in now. And I always see these kind of narratives as who's doing things, right? Who has the initiative? Who's pushing and driving? Right now, it is Chaos. That detonation just straight up evaporated some settlements and redefined the war map in an instant, and formed a Chaos Bastion right at the throat of one of the realm's largest bastions of order, Hammerhall Akshi, which has a gate leading directly to Azir. And that's just practical war stuff. Even if he didn't care about the Great Horned Rat outside of that changes fundamentally the tone and the rhythm of the war that's been going on. But there's another huge benefit to this. This time on the back end in the realm of chaos. The devastation and the panicked, selfish frenzy that this stirred in so many souls, all at once, so many, if you're playing fantasy battles, cascading route checks out the nose, it had an impact on the immaterial. In a crescendo of destruction and desperate fear, the Great Horn Rat ascended to the Chaos Pantheon, and the 4 became 5. Which may sound like a negative. Why would the guy who hates gods elevate something to that level? Because Archaon understands that the great game of the Chaos Gods all fighting for supreme power is a trap. And it's a trap he's mastered over millennia. Now the original 4 gods have a new dynamic to contend with, a new player, the ultimate backstabber. In the game of the backstabberiest backstabbers ever, and Archaon gets a new piece on his game board, a new thing that he can leverage or call upon, a new player to make pacts with, to double cross in exchange for. It's just more people that he can coerce or twist blessings from. If he's confident that he can manage the Skaven and the Great Horned Rat within that pantheon, this is only a win for him. And so Archaon agreed. And the Skaven Doom is the result of the collaboration. The Skaven had been watching the events of the Broken Realms and the Dawnbringer Crusades about what happens when you detonate realm gates or poison places of power. And I won't go all over the Skaven Doom over again. I've talked about it in several videos since 4th edition launched, except to add that Archaon's part of this setup was disseminating his orders to the lowest level to go out in specific locations in the realms and mountain ranges of Akshi and poison them. This fell largely to the Dark Oath tribes, which we were introduced to them in that last campaign book. Specifically, the Brands. Gunnar Brand is a character war band that was hired to go out and do a bunch of this. Or I should say tribes like his. In addition to actively aiding, the Skaven in doing this, because they would be maybe a little bit too conspicuous in some of the places, but Dark Oath tribes could sneak in. Well, in addition to all that, he also now, because he's on the planning board of the Skaven Doom essentially, he can prepare all his forces because he knows what's coming and nobody else does. Right? Knowing exactly when Skaven would shift the initiative, everyone do the synchronize your watch thing, and maybe he didn't let the other gods in on it, maybe he did. Regardless, the idea that we get, because whenever a new battle tome comes out in these editions, you always kind of get a sense of like the character's just about to do something. The writers over at Games Workshop are great about making all their books seem like characters have an active role, things they're exploring. Well, the way that this book kind of leaves Archaon is that he is getting set up to launch a multi-punch campaign that seems to be meant to be battering the heart of Sigmar's people in Hammerhall. Both sides of it. On the Ghyran side, he has his right-hand enforcer, Abraia, and she's essentially making sure that Hammerhall Gyra can offer absolutely no aid. She's trying to bleed the forests white. And on the Akshi side, his forces are not quite on the doorstep, but too close for Sigmar's forces to breathe even for like a second. Regardless, the initiative was seized, the grander forces of chaos bowing to him, and the Skaven essentially launched the first wave. And that's kind of where we leave things, with one tiny exception. And I say leave things, I mean as far as like his imminent conquest that he's focused on. This exception is not going to mean much now, but will become a big deal when we talk about Bellacor. See, we get this snippet that during the era of the Beast, this is kind of like lore that's written retroactively, during that time, one of the many Chaos Citadels in Gur was leveled. Okay, there was a lot of destruction for every faction going on, but upon hearing this, Archaon showed just a moment of his mortal weakness. He lost control in his anger, flew into a rage, and killed 3 of his own vanguard. Now, nothing actually came of that event. I mean, there's 3 dead vanguard, but I mean, like, it wasn't like he disseminated new orders to the army. It was pretty self-contained. But the surviving vanguard, the witnesses, all got to see him show the tiniest weakness in his artifice. Just a little nick, that you could see the inside of, like, there's a person in there, and they do lose control. So again, that will come up later, but as far as the rest of his plans, Archaon just seems to have really put these events into motion to push the initiative, and he's primed and ready for it. But that's just one character. Okay, now we're going to talk about all the things surrounding him. Because at the top, we mentioned that our mad scientist friend needed to produce things to get this meteor planned off the ground. And Archaon is no different. At the heart and soul of Archaon's war machine exists a pocket realm known as the 8 Points. Back in the Age of Myth, it was known as the All Points. It's a relatively small realm, so think of it as like the size of a continent versus the size of a whole world. And what's special about this place is on this little tiny plane, there's a gate to each and every single realm. So this became, in the Age of Myth, when everything was groovy, a huge place of trade and cultural exchanges and all this kind of stuff. It's basically where all the realms came together. Well, when the Age of Chaos kicked off, the Chaos Gods were each preoccupied with a realm that they wanted like most greedily. Khorne wanted Akshi, Tzeentch wanted Chaman, the realm of metal, Nurgle wanted Ghyran, Slaanesh was a little tied up and couldn't participate, and the Great Horn Rat wasn't a god. But Archaon, he had the brains, right? Those places, in his mind, didn't matter compared to the strategic value of the All Points. Because he was thinking, if I turned that place into a full military industrial complex, it has a direct door to each and every realm. That's quite an advantageous, place to be. And so that's exactly what he did. When all the other Chaos Gods were focused on other places, Archaon tore into the realms, seeking entrance into the All Points. There was an epic battle of importance here called the Battle of the Burning Skies, and this was Sigmar's last big push to keep Archaon's forces at bay. It's where he lost Gal Maraz, had to retreat back to Azir and start closing the gates. This was his little pocket realm. He defeated a god in battle here, and so Archaon claimed this as his own seat of power. It would become the wound from which he would poison every single realm, save Azir. Well, almost every realm. You see, it was that way for a very, very long time, but since the dawn of the Age of Sigmar, a few gates have been either reclaimed or taken from his control. This was sort of the zenith of the Realm Gate Wars overarching campaign. And I'm doing this off memory, but gates that are shut and under the forces of order, meaning they have the other side in the realm side shut, is Ghyran, Azir, and Akshi. Nagash and his Ossiarch Bone Reapers control the gate to Shyish and have fortified it. Although notably different, the three that the Order have, they just shut the gate and are fortifying like the Ghyran side, the Akshi side, and kind of one way cutting off the all points. Nagash, conversely, went into the all points with Catacross and built a fortress on that side of the wall, which is different because that means Catacross is the first hero to actively, have a new army marching on the all points since the Age of Chaos, which is pretty cool. The realm gate to Gur is stuck in a god beast's mouth. The Iron Jaws freed it from its chaos prison, so the gate is technically open, but it's complicated. You don't really want to go down there. Archaon still firmly holds the gate to the realm of metal, Chaman, as he punked several heroes in the process of the end of that book there. And Hish and Ulgu are a mystery to everybody. If they were mentioned anywhere that I missed, please let me know in a comment and I'll pin it, but I don't think I have any details on the actual gates going to the all points, or the 8 points rather, from those two realms. So he doesn't have a gateway to everywhere anymore, which is good, but it still makes a formidable obstacle to conquerors. It's still the heart of Archaon's power, which is a city at the center of the 8 points known as the Varanspire. This is where warriors come to train or aspire to be vanguard. It's where his best sorcerers perform their most gruesome rituals for visions of the future. It's, like I said, his industrial complex. It's where he makes his weapons and armors that are all over, cladding his hordes. It is a logistical feat of engineering because food and supplies are streaming in here like blood in the veins, coming from one war front to the other as needed. And at the center of the actual city is the Varanspire itself, an impossibly tall tower, at the top of which is an empty throne. It's made of the solidified souls of slain kings and molded into kind of an eternal torment, and they act as furniture for the Everchosen. But Archaon has yet to sit on his throne, and they call it the Empty Throne, and the plan is to have it remain that way until Archaon has conquered everything there is to conquer. Because that's, in his mind, when he's allowed to rest. For right now, it is just a physical monument to his hate, arrogance, and power. Now, one thing I sort of breezed over a moment ago was that the Varanspire is the place where Archaon tests, trains, filters out his vanguard. And so let's talk about them. This is the elite military command and warrior echelon of the Everchosen himself. Each one of these vanguard is an exceptionally powerful warlord of chaos undivided, but they wanted more than to bow knee to any other god. They believed in Archaon, that someone can refuse the will of the gods, and that this system of divine and mortal, can be broken by the mortals. We've seen these characters show up in a few different roles. They can group up, usually with Archaon, and act as his entourage or his bodyguard whenever he goes into battle. But individually, they also all carry the authority of Archaon when he gives them orders. So the vanguard can act independently, but also in cohesion. For an example, during the Dawnbringer Crusade, it was the vanguard who orchestrated all the Harbingers of Decay to start a great Nurgle ritual which saturated the entire realm in like a poisonous rain. They can all co-opt other Chaos armies because they have a higher authority level. So in this case, Maggotkin of Nurgle to the Everchosen's mission, or just supersede the individual warlord's commands. Meaning, let's say they need to recruit some warriors, and there's two Khorne armies that hate each other. Well, they'll stop their quarrel and bow knee to the vanguard, and then they'll settle up later. Now, the vanguard as a warrior chamber are divided up into 8 tiers of authority and utility, each called a circle. It's interesting because you'd think that the circles are a vertical tier, like people in Circle 1 are somehow better or more elevated than people in the 7th circle, but it doesn't quite seem that way, because the little lore blurbs that we get make it sound more like Archaon assigns like minds to a circle, like birds of a feather flock together. So it's more, I think, accurate to say that there are 8 specialities of evil that are all called circles. The first one is the Swords of Chaos. These are Archaon's finest warriors. They love one-to-one combat. Each of them is a god of war. Abraia, his number 2 vanguard, who we'll talk about in a second, is part of the first circle, as an example. The second is the Souls of Torment. This circle's focus is demonstrating might through sadism. They revel in mortal hopelessness. The example given is lining up defeated warriors and then making them draw lots for who's going to torture their kin. Again, it's just that double-sided of like making someone hurt who's giving the pain as well as receiving it. The third circle are the Scions of Darkness. These are your stealth experts. They are unsure if it's a chaos mutation or if it's actually spellcraft, but basically shadows cling to them. It makes them look like mist, and they're treated as outcasts by the other circles. Since most Warriors of Chaos seem to associate shadow magic with Bellacor, but of course that can be effective in a lot of combat situations. The fourth circle are the Reavers of Chaos. We mentioned briefly that many Chaos gifts can include mutations, and so this circle is made up of premier warrior whose notable attribute is the number of mutations that they can sustain without devolving into spawndom, right? So extra limbs, bug eyes, mandibles instead of teeth, and stuff like that. The fifth circle is known as the Scourges of Fate. These are Archaon's personal assassins. The third circle may concern itself with shadowy warfare, but that's not limited to assassinations. If Archaon wants, armies' morale broken, he'll kill the leaders or all the monsters that they have on their side. We even get a little lore blurb that Bastion Carthelos, one of the most premier Stormcast characters, was sent back to the heavens by a warrior of the 5th circle, so these guys are not messing around. The 6th circle is the Blades of Desolation, and this is just peak raw aggression. Endless armored bodies that hit the enemy like a sledgehammer, no finesse, walk forward, kill, win. The 7th circle are the Bane Sons. They revel in blood drinking and slaughter, and if you just want your enemy gone, call the 6th circle. If you want a spectacle that your enemy's nearby neighbors who are watching can also get scared of, you call the Bane Sons. These are chaos cannibals who look at the flesh eater courts and go, "You think cannibalism is your ally? You think cannibalism is your ally?" And the 8th circle is known as the Blades of the Traitor, which are going to make a fantastic segue to talking about Bellacor in another episode. But in short, some of the witnesses that saw Archaon's weakness when he killed the 3 Vanguard in anger were from the Blades of the Traitor. As a result, nearly the entire 8th circle has defected to serving Bellacor and or Eternus, who used to lead them. And so this is our first little introduction to the schism that is rocking the Slaves to Darkness, because even though we have our mad scientist who wants to destroy the world, that doesn't mean there's others out there with a we'll say competing vision, which we'll explore more with Bellacor. Now, I don't mean to be brief, but there really were like 3 sentences of lore for each circle, so that's kind of all we have to work with. The last character I want to mention here is Abraia. She is a vanguard of the first circle, so a premier warrior on her own, and her rise through the ranks was swift and brutal. She's killed countless champions, or rivals, or enemies, including 4 demon princes under her belt. Before Abraia, there was no number 2 to Archaon. He just had the circles below him. But she was like, hey, might makes right, correct? I'm going to be assistant to the Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse, and with might asserted herself in that role. Archaon was so impressed by her skill and her moxie, he was like, yeah, we'll make it official. Okay, you want to be number 2? He granted her the title granted her the title Spear of the Everchosen. At that moment, he gifted her also an actual spear weapon forged in Varanite. I think it's actually pronounced Gothagar. I always call it Gobble whenever I see it in the book. But essentially, it's a chaos spear that anything it touches turns into a chaos spawn, even a graze. In fact, in one of the Dawnbringer campaign books, it actually opens with her charging an enemy force, and like the spear nicks a guy, and it's just the whole story of him like writhing in agony as like other limbs are bursting out of him. It's super wretched. And again, she's in the first circle. She's a fantastic fighter in every sense, but there's a catch that this artifact also has, and that it's also a leash. Remember, it mutates anything that touches it. If Abraia's willpower or focus slips even for a moment, she will turn into a spawn herself. This is actually why she has some of the mutations she does. So Archaon elevated her, gave her what she wanted, but also put her in a most dangerous position. We met Abraia at the end of the Dawnbringer Crusades, and what we learned from there is that she is essentially put in charge of the Ghyran front of Archaon's war. In that campaign series, the Order city of Phoenicium was destroyed by Chaos, specifically Abraia, and it was renamed Blackpire. And like I said, since Archaon had lost the gate that goes into Ghyran, he doesn't have a centralized location to organize his forces. This is now that place. It is the anchor of Archaon's army in Ghyran. Here, she's prosecuting wars against the other bastions of order, poisoning their food, their water, attacking supply lines, the gates of Hammerhall itself, and more. Basically, never giving them a moment's rest so that they cannot aid Hammerhall Akshi. So we've talked all about Archaon's highest level, right? The man himself, what he's doing right now, poising himself to strike, his home base of the 8 points, the 8 circles of his vanguard, well, I should say 7 loyal circles, and then also the 8th one, and also his number 2, Abraia. But let me ask you this question, why are these things cool? Well, I kind of spoiled it by sprinkling a bunch of thoughts throughout the video, but the simple part is that this is the highest point of leadership. Everyone else that we talk about in this series wants to be these characters. They flock to the Varanspire to try and be a vanguard. And they are all the worst folks to know. Again, weighed down by the pacts that they made. The pacts and the curses, just like Abraia and her spear, every one of the vanguard have made deals with the devil, so to speak, to rise in power to get to this point, but it means they're beholden to so much. They're indebted to too many. They're slaves to darkness. And I feel like it's really important to hit both the highest echelon and the lowest, which would, I guess, in terms of power structure, be the Dark Oath tribes, but they're all on that same journey. And that's really why I wanted to highlight in my last video. These folks are no different. And what I love is that wrapped up in this one video, you will see most of the leadership that exists for Slaves to Darkness. Like, of course, there's Bellacor and Eternus. Those are named characters. That's awesome. They have their own side plot going on that we'll explore. But when it comes to, like, the overall armies, Chaos is often led by Archaon. Abraia is his number 2. They're having a 1-2 punch going on Hammerhall right now from both realm sides. And his vanguard act as his personal lieutenants, and they can just be disseminated everywhere. We've seen them in multiple stories show up and kind of wrangle different Chaos armies together to get a singular goal accomplished, and then they don't care if they fight each other afterwards. That dynamic makes all of these characters exceptionally interesting. If you have more things that you want to share about Archaon, or quite frankly, books that you think would be good reads, I already threw out Archaon Everchosen. Please list them down below. I always pin the most helpful comments, but I would love to hear your thoughts of the 3 things we talked about today. Archaon himself, the vanguard, or Abraxia. What is your favorite? I'm going to go with Abraxia. I know she got a rough release because, if you guys don't know this, the year that they released her, they had this like really awkward preview event at Adepticon where they accidentally, I guess, mentioned her lore and the lore behind her spear like 9 times in a row. So by the end, everybody was kind of making jokes like, oh, that's Abraxia. Did you hear her spear mutates people? Like, it was just kind of an inside community joke. That said, the further we get away from that comical event, the more I deeply appreciate like the position that she is in. She's much more knowable than Archaon, much more relatable in terms of struggles. We've already seen her struggle. She got infected with Flesh Eater Court Ness madness in the Dawnbringer's books, but she cured herself of that. But like, she's demonstrated vulnerability and conquering things, whereas Archaon is only ever windmill slamming the win button. If he is there on the scene, he dominates the scene, which is good. He should. But for storytelling purposes, I tend to enjoy more relatable characters. The Vanguard are fantastic. I feel like every edition that they've put out a battle tome for Slaves to Darkness, they've always added a little bit more intrigue to the Vanguard than the last. I mean, now it's kind of a full-blown schism between Bellacor and Archaon, as we'll explore later, but it wasn't always that way. It used to be very uniform in structure. And so seeing things like that evolve and change has been very rewarding. Anyway, let me know your favorite down below. I would love to read it. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends. Welcome, chieftains and war queens, to the feral wilds of the Mortal Realms, because today we are talking about the Dark Oath tribes as we continue our exploration of the Slaves to Darkness battle tome that dropped in 4th edition Age of Sigmar. This wave of models and characters represents the latest releases for the Slaves to Darkness as an army, and without question are some of my absolute favorite models that GW has made. I mentioned previously in this series that this battle tome felt like there were a bunch of different perspectives or chaos vibes within it. The higher level stuff being Archaon and Bellacor leading thousands of ironclad warriors in columns. But then there's also the people who've just been trying to etch out a living and survive the Age of Chaos. People who have no interest in those armies, they just want safe homes and families. Which unfortunately, in the realms that are saturated in chaos, still means a life of violence. But it is distinctly different from the point of view of a conqueror. This is much more local and tribalistic structure. It makes up the overwhelming amount of mortals living in the realms, the masses who were left to fend for themselves in the long night as the realms were corrupted and mutated and filled with horrors. Thousands of tribes were left abandoned when Sigmar the Deceiver fled his army and closed the gates of Azir. And to them, to their perspective, after the Battle of the Burning Sky, he ran away. He left us. And so, most of these tribes had a very simple choice to make. You join, or you die. You become servants of Archaon that he can call up as he needs, doing awful things and making horrid pacts, or you just die. The people faced with this impossible choice were the very first Dark Oath tribes. And that name actually is quite literal. It's a catch-all term for tribes of mortals who have made and are making dark oaths to the Chaos Gods. Bargains in exchange for power. Now, this could be, of course, power to beat an enemy army. You'll see that a lot with the rest of the Slaves to Darkness. But it could also be mutations or gifts that just allow your tribe to keep living. Never mind conquer anything, you just want to survive the environment that you're in. You can use chaos gifts for that too. And while that might be the origin of a lot of Dark Oath tribes, it's not necessarily how they all are now. Because Archaon is calling out all the warriors he can as the hour of ruin reigns supreme, right? It is an all hands on deck moment, while Chaos has the initiative, so to speak. And that includes all these people under his banner that just really are not super stoked. Or absolutely love it. There's a whole swath of what a tribe, a Dark Oath tribe could be, and we're going to talk about it today. Now, I find myself having difficulty in describing the Dark Oath tribes, not because the picture is unclear or there's no lore, but because the boundaries are so few. Just pulling a couple numbers off a quick search. For example, when we talk about the word tribe, okay, the Comanche tribe that controlled most of Texas in 1840 were around 40,000 people, compared to small tribes in parts of, say, Africa that max out at like 50 to 100. It's all over the place. And they are as different in depth and culture from one another as nation states are. And so it's important when I mention, the word tribe throughout this discussion, referring to fantasy tribes, just be sure to note that it's up to you to articulate what that means. Right? Write the lore for your own tribe. How big are they? Where are they? What are their resources? What's their natural environment trying to kill them with? And in the vastness of the mortal realms, it's probably fair to say someone did things the way that you're describing. It's just that in English, the word tribe kind of fails to convey the scope of what that could mean. And we've discussed a lot already of what that kind of, how people got here, really. They're just isolated civilizations that turn to the dark gods in varying levels. Sometimes it's to thrive in this new environment. Others just want to get the tools they need to be left alone. But to give a more firm answer than just do whatever you want with your lore, the book does a great job of giving us some examples. In fact, this battle tome has a few. These are the tribes of the Great Parch over in Akshi, the Realm of Fire. Why here? Well, to be honest, it's kind of a spot where a lot of the active narrative is happening, which is great for us being able to keep up with our favorite characters. It's also where the Skaven Doom tore a hole into Akshi and a big part of Blight City pierced out. An event that would not be possible without the aid of the Dark Oath tribes of the area. With exactly one exception to these tribes, they don't have a mountain of lore to them, but they are all great examples of why tribes fall to chaos and kind of what their motivations are. So let's chat about them. Starting off are the big ones, the one with the most information, the Brands. This tribe is the dominant force in the Adamantine chain, the mountain range that separates Hammerhall Akshi from this new Skaven city. So this dude is right in the action. It's said that his tribe is partially made up of remnants of an ancient Akshi warrior tribe known as the Direbrands, which, if you know your AOS lore, is the same tribe that featured in Red Feast when Korgus Kull initially tore the hole open to the Realm of Chaos and Khorne entered Akshi, but also the same tribe that Vandus Hammerhand, hero of the Stormcast, would be born to in his mortal life. This tribe, the Direbrands back in the day, was shattered, like I said, as Khorne entered the realm, and so their tribe kind of like, just scattered to the winds and tried to live lives with other tribes as much as they could. The Brands, as they are now, is led by the enigmatic Gunnar Brand. Now, he has a whole novel that is on my TBR list to be read. It's on my next one up. So I'll do a dedicated video on him once I finish it. But to be honest, there's not a lot of depth of his lore here in the Battle Tome. He's a chieftain. At the end of the Dawnbringer campaign, he was sort of our point of view into what the Skaven were planning. Essentially, Gunnar shows up at a meeting of all the tribes that live in his area. They have like a big moot. They all come together. And he starts hearing them brag about poisoning the realms and places of power. That they were all hired by demons to do this. And he starts to put the pieces of the puzzle together and kind of intuits that the Skaven are doing something and using his people, manipulating them to do it. He then runs to confront the Skaven, and he's essentially at ground zero when the Skaven Doom goes off, outrunning the blast and surviving. Now that was the last we saw of him, was him making it out alive after having deduced what was happening. Our next bit of lore, kind of bringing us into the current timeline, is that he is furious. Essentially, after that moment, Gunnar Brand went around to all the tribes of his little section of the Parch, meaning the mountain range, and he just gathered them all together. They were all used. And their rage is specifically pointed at the Skaven, which I adore. He hates them for destroying his homeland, which is more of a personal threat than anything that Order has done in the last century, right? Like the Stormcasts aren't trying to level a mountain range, destroy his home. They may not like Gunnar Brand, but it's not like an extinction level event like having, a whole part of a realm get ripped in half. We'll talk more about that here at the end, but essentially that's the Brand. They are the unifying tribe of the Adamantine chain, and they really hate the Skaven, who are their neighbors. The next tribe are the Tak Blood, T-A-K Blood. And this is the tribe that keeps the brands on their toes for control. They are supremely gifted fighters. They're led by War Queen Tanari, who is actually a member of Gunnar Brand's group that you can buy, like his actual model set. There's a War Queen in there, and that's her. And while they always clash and are at each other's throats for supreme power, now more than ever, they're joining blades with the brands because this new situation with Hammerhall on one side and Skavenhell on the other is not good for anybody. This is not a position where any tribe wants to be on their own, and Gunnar seems to have enough of a force of character to be able to lead these tribes. She also represents one of the tribes that was manipulated by the Skaven at the end of the Dawnbringer Crusade. Next are the Scavenge Kings of Aridian, and in the beginning, this tribe was often mocked and derided. Essentially, their method of surviving the long night of chaos was that they would sit and watch other forces fight each other, and then they would go pounce on the winner, take everybody's stuff. Wait until, like, they're basically opportunistic pack hunters as people. They watch a Bloodbound army and a bunch of Stormcast go at it, and when the fight's over, maybe there's only like 2 or 3 Bloodbound or Stormcast left. We're going to go charge them and take them out, and now we have everybody's stuff. Hence their name, the Scavenge Kings. And so this kind of gained them a reputation as being somewhat underhanded and sneaky, but like any smart person, they leaned in, right? This method of survival worked for them. And so they kept going, like, what else can we do? What else can we plunder? And eventually they found an old dwarven stronghold that was basically destroyed in the Age of Chaos, and they went in and they pillaged every single thing that they could find. They've ridden these opportunities a long way and established themselves as a very powerful tribe in the Parch. The thing is, though, scavenging equipment and weapons and stuff has a roof to it. There's only a finite amount of stuff just laying around, especially if you can confine yourself to a geographical region. And so there's a growing suspicion that their weapons and armor are now coming from a new patron, but no one is quite sure who. Like, their defining feature is having better stuff than the other Dark Oath tribes, but that stuff should have run out, which I like. And the last one here is super fun, but man is it a mouthful. The Varlhof of Kotha is the name of the tribe. And these guys just exist to be as metal as possible and to explore how nuts your tribe can be. I love it. They feature not at all in any of the books. They weren't there getting used by the Skaven. These are just other characters who are awesome. First off, they are piratical raiders that go up and down the coasts and rivers of the Adamantine chain, defeating both sea monsters and other tribes are built into their clan ritual. So like defeating a monster might be a rite of passage for a kid or something like that. Seafaring slaves to darkness, they worship Khorne, or at least their imagining of Khorne, as a massive blood-drinking kraken called Kothagrog, which is pretty awesome. One of their defining features of their warband specifically is that leadership changes very quickly, right? And imagine being a champion of your warband being challenged to a duel for leadership, but you're on a boat surrounded by sea monsters. Like, that's kind of the visual we get here. And this warband used to be kept in check by another local Slaves to Darkness warlord, a demon prince actually, who had his fort along the coastline and saw battles with these pirates as just kind of skirmishes with the locals. He didn't really care. But that demon prince fortress fell in the era of the beast when a whole bunch of grots ran over it. And so now the Varlhof of Kotha are free to pillage even more of the Akshi coast without their keepers. And from these, we get a sense of how varied the tribes can be. In several of them, we see, lineages that trace back to the Age of Myth. We see different ways of getting places, of settling grudges, innovating new ways to survive, like scavenging, raiding over the rivers. And one last time, to reiterate it for importance in this series, every single one of the forces that we've described today is on their own path to glory. Gunnar Brand, who hates gifts of chaos and Skaven, is on a path to glory. Again, whether it's to keep your clan at the top like the Brands, or the strength to punch a kraken to death so you can go home, everyone's on a path. So with that said, let's talk about the units involved. Like I said, the Brands are going to get a dedicated video once I finish their book. I just downloaded it on Audible, but we're going to explore the units that you can play with on the tabletop. Starting with the heroes, we have the Chieftain. We're going to start here because it's the most basic leader possible. If you play a full Dark Oath army, this is essentially your POV. Each chieftain is a cunning warrior that leads their tribes in matters of war and provision, because part of becoming chieftain is ensuring that the needs of the tribe are being met. You gotta do hunting, you gotta get water, you have to find food and opportunities to act as a predator so no one thinks that you're prey. There's a lot of things that go on. And that's just the survival aspect, because in most tribes, you're expected to go out and conquer. Take something from someone else. Now, chieftain obviously is a very important role in just about any tribe that you would experience, but I also want to throw out there that chieftains are not always the ones in charge. We've seen this in a few different short stories from Black Library. But for example, in a Tzeentch army, there might be a cabal of wizards who counsel them, but the chieftain is still there in the place of leadership for the military aspect, right? Others might guide the tribe. When it comes to battle, we defer to our battle lord. So saying he's at the top is not a unanimous statement. Now, I will slip in here in the Dark Oath section, or the chieftain section, that he is the only member of the tribe who knows the secret of the Wilder Fiend, who we will talk about later. And I say that's important because knowledge is power. Now, next up is the War Queen. And the War Queen is sort of an amorphous title. Essentially, it's a chieftain, but one that focuses entirely on grander armies. So a chieftain can rally his clan's warriors. They can get a few bows and arrows going, whatever, depending on the size of your tribe, of course. A War Queen can rally nations of tribes. They still have to assert authority and power by besting champions, but these are essentially chieftains plus. And my understanding from reading this is that both chieftains and war queens are a little bit nebulous in terms of hierarchy. For example, it might sound like a war queen is superior to a chieftain because their armies are bigger and they involve multiple tribes, but as an example, Gunnar Brand is in control of the Great Parch, and there's a war queen in his party below him. They've dueled. They try to fight each other. They could not land a killing blow. They're very evenly matched, and so they exist in this nebulous state as uneasy equals. And so my point is, there's not ranks. Have whoever you want to be in charge. For me, I choose the War Queen every time, because even though she's immortal, she exudes the same deity-level girl boss energy that like Marathi and Alariel do. But the point is, pick your favorite leader. Next up are the Marauders. These are the lowliest tier of warriors in the entire book. Like the whole book, Slaves to Darkness. They represent the endless masses of people pressed into service and ordered around by Archaon or a local warlord. Most of them are descendants of those who were left on the wrong side of Azir by Sigmar when he betrayed and fled them. And in order to survive, the Marauders, like everyone else, had to make these pacts with Chaos factions. But they keep theirs minimal, and that's really a big factor of what separates Dark Oath from the Slaves to Darkness other rest of the army, is that they keep their commitments to the Chaos gods minimal. A Chaos warrior is clad head to toe in armor that's infused with powers and blessings of the gods, whereas a Dark Oath marauder is much more reserved in their pledges. Instead of fully dedicating themselves to a life of violence in Archaon's armies, they make short-term deals with the Chaos gods. The night before battle, they take a small stone, called an oath stone, and they essentially carve a promise into it, an oath to fulfill. Should the god that they are beseeching the favor of be interested in this goal, they may gift the warrior strength or resistance to pain or whatever they need to achieve the thing that they're promising. Now, they aren't fully juiced all the time like a Chaos warrior is, but they also are not bound to a hellish fate like them, so it's kind of a trade-off. Marauders get to go home at the end of the day when the job is done. So let's say you have your oath stone, you put, I'm going to kill the enemy warlord with my own axe, and you cut your hand to seal the pact in blood. You've just made a dark oath, because you're a Dark Oath tribesman, and then you do it. You get to live another day. You get the power boost from doing that. The gods enable you to go out there and punk the enemy hero, and then it dissipates. But essentially, that's what the oaths of the Dark Oath War Scrolls are. The rules you see online where they have to achieve a certain thing to get a bonus. It represents the collective promises that they've made to the gods the night before, and when that achievement is unlocked, they swell in power. Next up are the Savagers, and this is a newer unit that introduced here, and I like them quite a bit. There's sadly a very small footnote about them in the Battle Tome, but what we get is that they are essentially marauders that have kind of become addicted to fulfilling oaths. They're each brutal warriors, they're super fit, super killy, but they love the boost of strength and I guess personal achievement that they get from a job well done. So these are always the first ones to make the biggest oaths, dark oaths, with their oath stones, and also the most frequent of them. Now, oftentimes, Savagers, when they are kind of fed up with how slow a tribe might be moving to war because they're not getting to make enough oaths for their liking, these are the ones who kind of peel off every once in a while and go to the Varanspire to see if they can get noticed by Archaon. To put it simply, think of them as heavy infantry marauders, right? They hit harder, they're a little tougher, because they're drifting away from that neutrality with the Chaos Gods. They're getting more and more into the path to glory. After them are the Fell Riders, and they represent yet another strain of marauders, but this time on horseback. And while that is simple enough, there's a little bit in here that I love, and basically they say that Fell Riders and their mounts live almost exclusively on hunted meats, which means horses that have developed a taste for flesh. After years of training, the rider and the mount can essentially move as one, favoring hit and run attacks with spears or lances. They're notoriously hard to pin down, which frankly is how they survived. Tribes that invest heavily in horses are ones that are dedicated to being mobile to either intercept Chaos's enemies or just escape whatever brutality Archaon has designated for their particular area. And the last unit in the Dark Oath lineup are the Wilder Fiends, a very peculiar monster with the Dark Oath moniker. And, I read their section like 2 or 3 times. To put it as simply as I can, a Wilder Fiend is like a very specific kind of chaos spawn, formed from a previous champion, chieftain, or war queen that hangs around their old tribe as both a guardian and devil. The longer version is that it's hard to be a chieftain and never fail an oath, but if you do, becoming a Wilder Fiend may be in your future. The way that they're described physically is very similar to a spawn until it comes to their behavior. A normal spawn is just a gibbering mess of flesh with no mind or whatever. You just kind of herd them into battle, point them towards an enemy, and they'll go off and eat something. But a Wilder Fiend hangs around its old tribe and becomes both a spiritual guardian and also like a boogeyman. If the gods decide a tribe is not doing enough, they may have their Wilder Fiend attack it in the middle of the night, right? The Babadook comes into town and takes a kid away because the gods are unhappy, which is obviously a punishment. That makes it a boogeyman, but if that same tribe goes to war and they pray to their ancestor spirits the night before or something like that, the Wilder Fiend will follow them and support them, acting like a spiritual manifestation of the tribe. It's their guardian, their protector, which makes them a hero, monster, totem type thing. Now, most tribes do not know that this monster is a former chieftain. The chieftain now knows, because oftentimes the new chieftain has to stand in front of and get approval from the Wilder Fiend, and he's the only Dark Oath that can summon the monster. And so for the overwhelming majority of a tribe, they don't know that this monster permanently exists. They just see it as an avatar of their deity strolling with them into battle, reinforcing that they're doing the right thing, and also acting as a boogeyman to keep them on the straight and narrow when they're at home. So the monster exists as both an asset to the tribe, but also in its shadow, nudging it more and more to do the bidding of the Chaos Gods. You can make sacrifices to the Wilder Fiend, and it will share the blessings of chaos with the tribe, which is kind of how it works on the table. You just keep track of things that die near it, and then you can kind of redistribute those souls or whatever into giving you cool buffs. And I just try to imagine, one of my favorite characters in all of fiction is the boogeyman, Oogie Boogie from Nightmare Before Christmas. And I'm just trying to imagine, as a kid, the boogeyman scares you, but then as an adult, when your friends and your family are all about to die, imagine the literal Oogie Boogeyman popping out onto the battlefield and killing everybody. Everyone who's ever wronged you, and it's just you and your family left. That's intense. That is a day. I feel like you would be totally warranted to look at your mom and be like, So, like, is the Easter Bunny real too? Like, what are we doing here? What else we got? And so I want to end this discussion, like I end all of mine, by asking the question, why is this cool? And I have a little bit of a different idea for how to do this. I mean, the things that I could say about the Dark Oath units are the same stuff that I say about all the Chaos stuff. I love the Path to Glory. I love the Dark Secrets. I love the Promises, the Oaths. I think it's all really neat. But in this ending of a video, I want to talk about how different tribes can be. And essentially, I'm going to give you a questionnaire. If you're trying to write the lore for your own Dark Oath tribe, these are some of the questions I want you to consider. First off, how big is it? Could be 5 to 10 people. It could be up to 40,000. You choose. How into chaos are they? Are they like the Brands, who kind of spurn chaos gifts until the last second and they try to do everything with pure physical might? Or are they just super into it? Who's in charge? You got maybe a cabal of wizards, you have a war queen, a chieftain, some combination thereof. You can make your own thing up and be like, this is a triumvirate of tribes that came together and now you have 3 essential leaders. Get creative there. The next question to ask is, where are they in the mortal realms? Because your literal environment is going to shape a lot of how you do things. For example, if you have a lot of water, they're going to be seabound. If you live in thick forests, you're going to have different homes than someone who lives in the desert. But the environment dictates what kind of threats that your tribe is trying to avoid or survive against. My next question would be, how do they sustain themselves in that environment? So, like our tribe next to the water, pirates. Just become raiders up and down the coast. That makes complete sense. In the desert, they're likely nomadic. In the forest, they could be static or nomadic. You choose. Does your tribe have a wilderfiend? And if so, who knows about it? Does your tribe know the full pantheon and call them by name? If not, how do they interpret the pantheon and archon? And this was a fun thing we got when Warcry first dropped, is that all these chaos warbands and their own weird eccentricities all viewed the chaos gods differently. And they didn't even use the same names like Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, whatever. They would have their own and essentially overlay worship of the pantheon on top of it, which is so interesting. Just like we had, the Khorne is actually a kraken, blood-drinking kraken for that one example. You could do all of that, and you don't even have to have all 5 of them. You could just say, we worship Tzeentch and Slaanesh. We call them something else, and the other 2 we don't care about. Any combination you want is on the table. Does your tribe descend from anyone notable, or do you want their origins to be a part of this at all? I mean, it could just be scattered collections of people, or like the Brands descended from a notable tribe in history. And lastly, how do they feel about the other factions near them? One of the things I love about this book is the idea of Gunnar Brand despising Skaven above all. Because if you think about the way Axii is set up now, you have on one side the Skaven, army, horde, Rift of Chaos, Skaven Blight. On the left side, you have Hammerhall Axii, and right in the middle is a mountain range that separates them. The forces of Hammerhall Axii are rushing to that mountain range to start building defenses, and the tribes of that mountain range hate the Skaven probably as much, if not more, than the forces of Order. So it makes for a very strange wall separating 2 of the most important narrative juggernauts that are going on in the story right now. Their position is interesting just because of their neighbors and who they hate over one or the other. And I find that interesting, so I would ask the same thing of your tribe. Maybe yours has a good working relationship with the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, because you go out, you hunt people, you bring a bunch of dead bodies back, and sure, we got nothing else to do with the bones. We'll take the skulls for a temple or something, but you can have the corpses. Sure, pay your tithe, as an example. And so, friends, I want to leave you with those thoughts to design your own tribe. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have one written out, or at least based on those questions, please leave it in the comments down below. As far as my favorite unit from among these, the Wilderfiend is absolutely my favorite, because I love the idea of this duality of being like our tribe's guardian spirit, but also like their tormentor, right? Like somewhere between guardian angel and Babadook. I like to get right up in there. Inside you, there are 2 wolves, and those are my 2. Anyway, friends, I would love to hear your thoughts. What is your favorite unit that we talked about today? Leave it in the comments down below along with your tribe lore, and I will talk to you in my next video. And happy wargaming to you. Welcome, Wargamers, to the hell pits and hordes of the mortal realms. Today, we are talking about the humble, of course, warriors of chaos, and basically getting a deeper picture of what the path to glory means in a practical sense as we explore the various units that make up the Slaves to Darkness army that you and I can play on the tabletop. This, of course, all comes from the lore from their battle tome, which is one of the newer ones in 4th edition, so I wanted to come back and kind of finish out this series, spending a little bit more time with what is now my army that I play. We've talked previously in this series about the endless masses of tribes trying to etch out a living in the realms, and basically while the suffocating reach of their presence is always felt, Dark Oath tribes alone were not how Archaon conquered the realms and ushered in the Age of Chaos. He did it with highly militarized legions. So within that subset of Chaos followers, the bulk of them, just in terms of numbers, of course, is Dark Oath stuff, but then there's this core legion of warriors, clad in cursed iron, wielding all kinds of hellish weapons. Each is trained, well-equipped, and deadly with their weapons, and they all have their own personal stake in seeing the realms laid low. Every one of them is on their own path to glory. But as we've kind of specified throughout this series, the nature of that path will change over time. You may start this path to glory just to survive your local environment because the realms got all wrapped up in the craziness going on around them. Then you might get pulled into events outside your tribe, only to now find your path to glory now about dominating enemies or other warriors competing for survival or small scarce resources. And another way to think of the idea of the path to glory is also as a refining process, right? It turns wild chieftains into these ungodly weapons of war that can mobilize huge armies. And as you travel down this path, your skill sets develop and evolve. And really, that's what this story is. If the goal is to end up as a vanguard underneath Archaon or the demon prince of a different, specific deity, you can get that by being a peerless expert on all aspects of war, right? You're cunning, you're strong, you know how to lead and get things done, like that kind of higher level military thinking. And the path to glory has weeded out anyone who can't meet that description. And so we'll start at the bottom and work our way up, right? Starting at the fighting pits of the 8 points and carving our way up the ranks of ascension, basically to either Demon Prince or part of the Everchosen's vanguard, whatever. There's different goals you can have within the Slaves to Darkness. But the goal here for the purposes of this video is no matter where you're headed, you're becoming a better part of the Everchosen army. Now, one thing I'd like to add up top at the start of this video, if you're interested in anything Warhammer, please consider supporting me and my family by using the affiliate links in the description down below. You'll see exactly how much money you save, and every single time you do, it directly supports me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel, and it really does mean a lot to me. I also want to shout out that I do have 2+ tough dice, and if I see them at Adepticon, I got a little treat for you. And also, if you wanted to learn more about playing Slaves to Darkness, because they did get quite a rules change from their previous battle tome to now the 4th edition one, go check out Goonhammer. It's full of painting tutorials, tactical tips, all that kind of stuff regarding everything you could want to know about the wargaming hobby. So check out Goonhammer. And so we'll start off here with congratulations, right? Of course celebrations are in order. You did it. You achieved the rank of chieftain or war queen of your small tribe. Remember, we're building off of our Dark Oath video we saw before. And now you're on top, ruler of all that you survey. But you want more. Maybe you like the feeling of climbing to the top, and now that game is over because you're at the top. Or maybe the gods whisper to you of great potential if you fight for them. Whatever the reason, you want to take that next step towards the Pantheon. And of course, that could also be just Archaon presses you into service. Well, I say it's good to get in on the ground floor with the biggest employer of the mortal realms. The unholy eightfold powers of chaos. Expand your horizons, travel to scenic vistas, and climb a very bloody corporate ladder. And that journey up those ranks can look like a lot of different things. And here's where I want to point out some fantastic literature. I mean, some stuff that is, to me, some of the more interesting things that AOS has published from Black Library. Specifically, the series Call of Archaon. I highly recommend it. It's like, I think 3 or 4, I'm not mistaken. Basically, different warbands that are all being called by Archaon to compete for a place among his vanguard. And so it's just different warbands who have vastly different outlooks, motivations for why they're doing what they're doing, subversions within them, as they're striving to move further along. So again, that's just a throw it out there for you. Good reading. Scourge of Fate is another great one as well. But unless you get a specific summons, your most likely bet is to be noticed at the Varanspire, which involves a deadly trek across the 8 points, as we've discussed when talking about Warcry. You gotta find a way through one of the realm gates, walking over the blasted wastelands that is the 8 points itself, and arrive at the Varanspire, which is this massive spire at the top of the actual realm itself. Now, the most obvious and accessible way to make a name for yourself at the Varanspire is to enter the fighting pits. It's blood sport for entertainment, and becoming a celebrity here will get you noticed and probably get you killed. But it's a great place for networking, for lack of a better word. Rising the ranks of Chaos requires accomplishing larger and larger feats, which will require a little bit of collaboration to achieve. And this is where many of these early Chaos Warriors, or people who want to be, can start to develop their own cult following. This guy delivers on entertaining fights. I want to follow him so that I can join them. They can cut down warriors for street cred. They can spare them in order to get their service, like, I'll spare your life, you serve me now kind of a thing. And this is where early signs of favor can start to be achieved. And the next time that Archaon, calls for a roundup of new warriors, well, you can believe that they're going to pick someone strong enough to survive the gladiatorial pits of the 8 points. It's pretty dangerous, so this is an obvious slam dunk. This is the start of many characters' path to glory. The transition from something closer to Dark Oath, whether you were the chief or not or whatever, you just left your warband to go find new ways to fight. But that kind of evolution from an untrained warrior to a deeply trained one. Specifically becoming a warrior of chaos as we know the unit. Because at this point, things have just become bigger than your local kin. Right? This is about something grander, achieving control of and remaking the realms, which can be the goal for a lot of reasons, a lot of sympathetic reasons as well as patently evil ones. And from here, when you kind of transition into being a chaos warrior, there's a few different endpoints. Maybe you want to rise through the ranks in order to offer yourself to a chaos god, ascending to demon prince and immortality. Or maybe like Archaon, you curse the gods, and you see him as being a mortal rebelling against the divine, in which case you're like, I want to join that party. And the highest rank there would be a vanguard. No matter your reason, this is your first step on that path to glory, and the refining process of chieftain to god of war begins here. And so this is where I want to switch to talking about the specific units, starting from the bottom and working our way up. And keep in mind, as I'm want to clarify this one last time, this is not a linear ranking system. You can hop different sections if you do some massive favor or receive some boon from the gods. It's not a very linear thing, but this is generally speaking the progression you see over centuries of war and warfare. So starting at the bottom tier of Archaon's personal legions are the Chaos Warriors, right? This thing that you just got the promotion to. And this is basically any of the Dark Oath warriors that made it to the Varanspire or saw one of Archaon's armies marching and said, I want that life. If you want to follow the path to glory in ways that go beyond your immediate tribe, you'll eventually end up here at some point. And while you may have been super hot stuff in your tribe, killing like a madman and earning all kinds of accolades, in this context, you become a very small fish in a very big ocean the moment you make this jump. It's not unfair to think of Chaos Warriors as like elite Dark Oath troops or leaders or whatever that's acclimating to a new kind of warfare. Heavily clad armor, ranks and formations instead of hit and run. There's a lot to learn if you came out from the middle of nowhere. Because as you kind of cultivate all this personality around being a Chaos Warrior, you're exposed to things like logistics, methods of command, how to build a roster of subordinates, who you can trust to get the job done, and then people you can't trust, etc. A side set of Chaos Warriors are the Chaos Legionaries, and essentially the only distinction is, I think I mentioned them in the Bellacor video, they're basically Chaos Warriors that work for Bellacor instead of Archaon. There's not even really much of a lore blurb about them in the actual lore section, so I just wanted to kind of put that in there. Like, they're kind of roughly the same rank, but they have a little bit of a distinction based on who they take orders from. Now, next up are the Chosen. If you survive for some years as a Chaos Warriors, and you've made many dark pacts and delivered on those pacts, or you've collected enough rewards and boons of chaos, you can be elevated to the rank of a Chosen. Essentially, elite infantry of the faction. These are Chaos Warriors that focus exclusively on melee combat. They're the most heavily armored, typically the fewer in number, and these are like right on the edge of becoming a Chaos Lord. The next few ranks kind of all are in that same kind of sphere. But what's cool about the Chosen is they can kind of act as a lot of different things. So for your warband, personally, if you're writing your own, Chosen can act as your strike team, your advisors, random champions that you see just because you want to have a unit of the best. Whatever it is, but that's kind of, there's like an obvious jump in skill level between a Chaos Warrior and a Chosen. Now I put these next two options kind of like laterally next to them, and that's the Chaos Knights to start there. And it's lateral because during your time as either a warrior or a Chosen, you can receive a boon from the Chaos Gods in the form of a mount. It's a horse that's so infused with chaos corruption that it grows massive. It's like all kinds of weird muscles spurting out of it. Some of them have horns if you look at the model kit. It breathes ash. But of course, with all chaos gifts, it's two-sided. It's going to help you get into battle for the specific purpose of killing more. However, it is a chaos creature with a will of its own, which means the rider needs to constantly be dominating the will of the mount in order to be able to use it. So there's always this personal struggle of like you're trying to kill stuff, but also you have to keep constantly forcing your mount to do your bidding, which sounds like a pain. But that all said, being a knight is a clear sign of favor from the Chaos Gods. You must have done something right. This guy is going places. So while it is a step on the character's path to glory, it's not a tier that everyone goes through. You can go upwards without ever being gifted a horse. You could be gifted something else. And side by side with them are the Chaos Chariots. And these are, largely the same, right? But their entire entry is about how suicidal this whole thing is, okay? Because now you have to be able to wrangle two of those horses, those hell horses that we got running around, in a moving cart that is turning people to pulp all around you. But the trade-off is, you can bring your best buddy along with his favorite flail and just, watch out for hop-ons. You're going to have hop-ons. But you can go out there and have a great time. The book didn't indicate that one has sort of like a greater degree of favoritism to it. It's not like if you get a knight or a mount to become a knight, you're somehow more favored than a chariot. But the two are kind of like on the same plane. And you will, as a warrior of chaos, spend some time amongst these ranks. The warriors, the chosen, knights, and chariots. These make up the foundational infantry types that are the hallmark of Archaon's armies. This is a stage that's going to take you centuries. Pretty much everyone you know is going to die if you don't first. And it's meant to winnow out the weak, because the next tier is when you start plucking people up for leadership, right? Once you're in the chosen and you're like a counsel to somebody, or you have any form of input when it comes to matters of war, that's the tier where leaders start getting plucked out. One of the first gifts you tend to get is extended life, because you've at least pleased the gods enough for them to want to, continue rolling the dice on you. Let's see how far this little guy can go. And so now that we're past the point of, regular mortal lifetimes, that's when you start developing yourself as a leader, a warrior, a cult leader, a politician, whatever, you want to call it, but you're developing your cult of personality and unique skills. And I say all that because someone left a comment on one of my videos asking for like a really well-defined hierarchy of a Chaos Warband, and it just does not exist. You can be led by a sorcerer, a warlord, a physical embodiment of a god in the form of a demon prince, and in any combination, meaning there could be a council of wizards, twin demons, a whole, round table of chaos lords that are all knightly. So instead of thinking of them in terms of necessarily leadership rank or role or hierarchy, I tend to think of leaders in the Chaos Army more as specialties, right? These are specialists that have been developed from Chaos Warriors over their tenure in battle. If they have a proclivity towards magic, it's probably because it saved their bacon a couple times, and so they've developed that as sort of their personal unfair advantage, and you lean in. And that's how you end up a sorcerer. If your unfair advantage is like decimating cavalry charges, you're going to lean in and have a whole bunch of knights around you, and so on. So when I look at different heroes, it's like, okay, well, what got you to the top? That's kind of, I guess, the more general question, as opposed to how do you fit into leadership. We'll kick it off with the Exalted Hero of Chaos. This is a hero solo. He's just off on his own. And the idea is, if you make yourself an asset to your Chaos Lord, you'll go up the ranks faster. And so these sort of act like chosen. They're essentially selected and ranked as questors. And so what that means is, like, they can just go out and do their own kind of solo mission. They don't have to answer to a specific boss or a unit leader. They just are a little bit more of an independent agent. Their job, generally speaking, their role is pure one-to-one combat fighting, as they are essentially the headhunters of heroes. So if you've proven to a warlord that you can deliver in one-to-one combat specifically, they might have you enter as a exalted hero, and they just give you the task of go take that hero's head. And you're given free reign and some authority to do so. However, you have to keep delivering. Because it's not a leadership rank in the typical sense of where you are leading a force personally. It's just a solo hero. So if you can't deliver, you are of no use to anybody. The next up is the Chaos Lord. And there are a few flavors of Chaos Lord, but they really all have the same role. These are the military leaders on the ground for any given Slaves to Darkness army. Most of the forces you'll see or read about in general Black Library novels are sort of about this tier of leadership. This is your warlord of a particular warband, the leader of a particular offensive, and so on. And each one of these is intended to be like a fully sagaed hero worthy of their own personal novel series, right? They've lived hundreds of lifetimes, killed thousands, learned to lead armies, deliver on pacts to dark gods, and navigate their treacherous contemporaries and take control for themselves. When I am, painting and building a chaos army, this is kind of who I identify with the most, right? I pour the most character into this figure because he's the leader of the cult of personality that's going to disseminate everywhere else. Sort of on par with him in terms of, this could be your leader or not, there's also the Chaos Sorcerer, who we mentioned earlier. It's the same tier of leadership, but it is one that relies on magic instead of the brute might of combat. Now this again can look like a lot of different things. One of my favorite stories was from the Realmgate Wars, and it was the first time we ever saw the Realm of Metal, Chamon. In that story, there's a Chaos Sorcerer Lord who is the main villain of that particular campaign, and he outsources his army to a Chaos Lord on Manticore at the time. And it was really cool. He had this like Tzeentchian fortress that would like suck in souls, but again, he didn't have much of an army. He just had warriors of chaos beneath him. So they can be in charge or not. They could even just be kind of oracles if you wanted. However they fit into the scheme of leadership, they can be there. But even if they aren't leaders themselves, they bring enough to any army that any Chaos Lord would want one. An immediate plus of having a sorcerer with you is that they can interpret the will of the gods. As much as you can trust anyone to do so, there's actually a few of those stories in that Call of the Everchosen series I mentioned, where they get lied to by their seers and oracles. So it's like, take what you can get, but they have this advantage. They can provide cover or like arcane resistance to enemy wizards, and they just have a lot of insight into the esoteric, which is a huge advantage when you're dealing with unholy artifacts and curses and all kinds of things like that. And lastly, at the end of every path to glory is the Demon Prince. And I put the Demon Prince here as the final step because we already talked about the vanguard in Archeon's video. But this is what millions upon millions of masses are walking towards. To be blessed by the Chaos Gods, so much so that they choose you to be their vessel. Your mind and your soul are elevated and infused with the essence of that deity. More than man, more than demon, you are an eternal engine of war. With all the power and the legions at their disposal they could ever want, basically their full-time job for the rest of eternity is to just keep their patron satisfied. because it's a very long hell if you can't. And again, if you are not interested in working for the gods, this is the point where you would try to become one of the vanguard. But let's end this video like I end all of them by simply asking the question, why is this cool? I've alluded to this a few times throughout this series, but the old Warhammer Fantasy Battles had a Path to Glory system where you and your buddies would just open up a ton of Warriors of Chaos boxes and roll randomly to build your warband and play narrative games like that. Seeing all these units and the different ways that a fictional character can evolve or express themselves through different roles in the army is just so much stinking fun. And what I love is the flexibility here. So I gave you a very a loose hierarchy, right? I would say they're more just different tiers or specializations. But what I love is that the different Black Library books throw immediate curveballs into this to make it interesting, right? Just there's a billion exceptions to the rule. By that I mean, if you are a lowly Chaos Warrior and you just so happen by the skin of your teeth to kill the enemy leader, right? No one expected you to. They just showed up where they weren't meant to be, and all of a sudden they're right in your face, and you just happened to deliver the landing blow. You might be gifted an incredible artifact of chaos. And now all of a sudden you have that. So maybe you rise immediately to the rank of chosen. Or, you can just kind of jump around. The blessings are non-linear. You could then have a mutation that sets you back a little bit. It's all over the place. And that to me is what makes it so fun. It's a whole army of different ways to advance, different ways to express your deity worship, and the way that you like to go to war, mixed with this kind of like birds of a feather flock together. Like if we're all blessed in the way we have horses, we form a unit of knights kind of a thing. These aren't your friends, but you can do more together than you could separately. And so it's this very begrudging kind of teamwork and cooperation. But of course that builds something. When everyone does it, it builds into the largest army that exists in this fantasy setting. And so for my end, I absolutely love the Slaves to Darkness for their huge roster. The Dark Oath stuff I think is narratively exceptionally interesting. I wish on the table it looked a little bit more interesting, but I am really thoroughly enjoying all of my Archon stuff. My army is predominantly, or almost exclusively actually, all of the Chaos Warrior, Knights, Chariot, that kind of thing, which I'm stoked about. But I would love to hear this. What is your favorite? If you could pick one of these ranks to get stuck at, I think that I would go Chosen. You're not quite the boss, so things don't fall on you, but you're also higher up than the overwhelming majority of people. I don't know if I would want a knight because I don't want to constantly argue with a horse all day. And maybe if I had the right buddy, if I found the dumb to my dumber, we could probably get a chariot together and have some fun. But yeah, personally, I'm going to stick with Chosen, probably going with some kind of big axe, because that's my style. Let me know your thoughts. Who would you want to be from this list? Obviously, Demon Prince is the answer, but I mean, pick a lowly one. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming. It's been said that a house divided cannot stand. And I think we all understand the wisdom at play there. But here's an odd question for you. What does that mean if the house was designed for and built upon concepts like, say, rebellion, or change, or betrayal, or hate? If this house is designed for division, in other words, does that old saying still apply? What if being divided was a feature and not a bug? Will it fall? And I ask you this as we explore a new thorn in the side of Archaon the Everchosen, who we spoke about before. A rebellion of faith and trust from within his own forces. But it's not making the house fall, at least not yet. But instead, it opens up a whole new kind of suffering upon the mortal realms, because no longer is Archaon the Everchosen the sole foundation of power in the realms flooded with chaos. But Bellacor, the Dark Master, is right there with him, lurking in the shadows, and he's been waiting for his moment this whole time. And he is the subject of today's video. We're going to be talking about Bellacor as a character, the first prince, but also about his place in the overall faction because, from a game perspective, he has an army of renown, which is just extra rules or whatever. But what that represents in the lore is a true schism that is tearing through the Slaves to Darkness. In a world of might makes right, or at least that's their ethos, What happens when two characters both look pretty darn mighty? You know, if you're a bystander trying to decide who you follow, it could perhaps create a crisis of faith. Because in addition to Bellacor, I want to talk about his champion, the counterpart to Archaon's Abraia. For Bellacor, he has a soldier named Eternus, who did feature at the start of the era of the Beast, if I recall. And so we're going to explore the lore of the boss, his number one guy, and the horde of demons that they can call to their banner. Because this battle tome, like I said before, has a second army in it where Bellacor can tap into the lesser demons of other chaos entities and bring them to do his will. So let's chat about that. So who is Bellacor? Well, much like Archaon the Everchosen, he is a character from the old world that was brought forward. Though, he is a demon prince who spent a lot of time in the realm of chaos, so to me it doesn't feel as anachronistic or out of place for him as a character to come forward. But, to put it very, very simply, Bellacor is a demon prince. The first demon prince, in fact, and the only one to really represent chaos undivided. Back in the world that was, Bellacor was a mortal who was the first to catch the eye of the chaos gods. They each imbued him with a sliver of their divine power and exalted him to the role of demon prince to lead their armies. But then the four, at the time, chaos gods became argumentative over whose armies he would lead and when, and so Bellacor took all the gifts that he could from these chaos gods and tore his own way into the real world. And there, Bellacor spread so much chaos that the other chaos warbands and champions rose up. Basically, he started a trend. He brought the powers of, the warp to the real world, which created a might makes right mentality, and then other tribes started to raise warriors who were mighty. Cause and effect. And all of a sudden, those champions start to catch the eye of the chaos gods. Although this time the gods were a bit more savvy, right? Each was jealous for the sole devotion of their mortals. So they're not going to be taken for a run like Bellacor before. That was just a mark of us all trying something different. But now that we know there's plenty of champions and we could all have our own and covet them all to ourselves, well, that's why demon princes since then are always marked to a specific god. Bellacor ruined it for everybody, but this also meant that he had competition and a big loss of favor as he cheated the gods out of their power, right? He would basically take gifts from a god and then not achieve what they wanted, and those gods would take those gifts back and put them on their own demon princes. And when I say these events, this all happens over like a hard to fathom amount of time, because his story in the old world kind of ebbs in and out of time. He kind of goes in and out of the realm of chaos. So it's a long chronological time spanning drama. Things that we know about him: he really, really despises Archaon the Everchosen, more as a competitor. In fact, he was forced to crown the Everchosen as a punishment by the Chaos Gods, basically seeing someone sit in his place, his rightful throne, because now Archaon's the favorite child. And while this, annoys Bellacor to no end, he does always look for opportunities, and that's something that's really big about his character. See, he might hate Archaon, but he also acknowledges that Archaon seems to be good at manipulating the Pantheon, right? Pinning them against one another. And it may seem that this is why refusing the gift of demonhood is smart, right? Because if you're a demon, then you're a slave to one of the gods. We don't want that. We want to do our own thing. Whereas Bellacor's position is fundamentally different. He seems to think that if he can just get the favor of the gods again, then that rightful place is his. I am a child of chaos. I am made of the stuff of demons. I have been blessed by all four. I was chosen. I am eternal, and I will outlast Archaon, provided he stays mortal. Which is true. It's jealousy and a rage all mixed in about this rightful place being taken. And so he doesn't see the demon prince thing as a trap, more like it's just about getting the eye of the gods, no matter whether you're mortal or demon prince. So now, when he arrived in the mortal realms, he more or less snuck out of a realm gate during the Age of Chaos. All the gods and Archaon were busy, and so he strolled out of hell and looked for a place to kind of claim as his own, immediately going to Ulgu, the realm of shadow. Now, if you don't know, Bellacor is a master of magic, shadow and deception magic in particular, and it's in Olgu that he built his own fortress, his own chaos, bastion known as Mordekar. And it's from here that he began the era's long game of conquest and recruitment. Just going out, conquering tribes, absorbing them into your forces, and then slowly snowballing up until you have a massive army. He's taking every chance to keep something for himself, right? Something that's not to the Chaos God, something that Archaon doesn't know about, but also to really deepen the devotion of his followers. Remember that part of being a Chaos Lord, whether you're mortal or demon, is this cult of personality that you have to develop. And all the while he's building this, he's watching and scheming. He knows that if he's going to do something to get the eye of the gods, it has to be big. And so it was Bellacor who first set into motion events that would see the realms changing forever. This is one of the earlier dominoes on a big galactic game of dominoes, right, tipping over, that we see happening even till now in the Hour of Ruin. So in Broken Realms Bellacor, which I have a much more detailed series on, I'll try to remember to link it down below, he created a new celestial phenomenon known as the Cursed Skies. In short, this is the long way around it, but in short, he crashed a silver tower into a realm gate. Not him in particular, but he set up the events. He saw the devastation that it caused, especially what happens when you blow up or detonate a realm gate, and then set a plot into motion that saw him chain destroying a whole bunch of them all across Chamon. When you do it the right way, it essentially tore open a hole straight to the realm of chaos, but in the sky. Almost like you were, pulling the thread and undoing the realms themselves, and now there's this hole in the fabric. The hole is a portal to hell. This meant that when Stormcast Eternals that were slain start to arc back to Azir, they actually get swallowed up by the Cursed Skies instead. This act, right, was quite large, and it's Bellacor's big gift to the Chaos Gods. A new way to consume the realms and the souls of anyone in them. The scale was cataclysmic. You're destroying realm gates that cannot be rebuilt. You are undoing the threads of reality and spreading the warp of chaos over a massive area of the realm of metal. It was a big power play that came completely outside of anything Archaon the Everchosen was doing. So this is essentially Bellacor's pitch to the Chaos Gods of like, you want the realms? Like, let's just dismantle them. Let's eat them up. We don't need to march from place to place to place. Let's just eat them. And Archaon hates that idea. I cannot stress that enough. Because Archaon's armies are mortal, we need those realm gates to get places. Stop blowing everything up. And I have to say that book was super fun. There's a lot more to it that I didn't explain here. This is my quick synopsis. But like, he makes a deal with Lady Olander of the Night Haunt, which was a great example of different factions interplaying with one another. It was a really cool story. Of course, the idea of chain detonating realm gates or important sites, if that sounds familiar to you, yes, this is where the Skaven watched and learned how it was done. And I assume the entire era of the Beast was them in the background working on the Skaven Doom, which basically took Bellacor's little lesson with the Cursed Skies, and then they kind of orchestrated it to be bigger so they could punch a part of Blight City through. It was just kind of taking his idea and iterating on it. But Bellacor's plan, right, what he achieved was so grand in scope that others couldn't help but be drawn to it. I mean, the Cursed Skies is the biggest step forward of spreading demonstrably more chaos in the realms than they have seen since the Age of Chaos. And because of that, the Slaves to Darkness faction begins to divide and splinter. See, I mentioned in a previous video that Archaon is the undisputed leader. And that was purposefully taken out of context. He is undisputed like the way that the Roman Emperor Caligula was undisputed, which is that, sure, he's in charge, no one argues that, but it doesn't also mean that there's not a whole room of people who would love to see you die. If you don't know, Caligula got killed by his guards, some senators, a few others, but the point being of like, no one argued his authority, they just all wanted him gone. And there have been a quickly growing sect of demons and mortals who see Archaon's plans as without end. Like, there's no end game here, just keep conquering. And it just looks kind of pointless. Not pointless, like obviously there's the point to consuming, to rising up your own path to glory, but at a certain point you're going to be left with nothing but other chaos factions, and then it's just a brawl forever. And then you contrast that outlook on Archaon's plans with Bellacor. Bellacor is a character who is massively powerful. He's blessed by the gods, like Archaon is. He's impressed them very recently. He's making big moves. And so it becomes reasonable for any Chaos soldier who looks up and sees the cursed skies to say, wait, why isn't that guy in charge? Right? That's a big biggie. We haven't done anything this big in a while. Why isn't he the one in charge? And that's what I mean by like might makes right. When other people become mightier, is you start to see different demonstrations of power, and it confuses people. And this is the schism that Bellacor exploits. Now, how this squares with the Skaven Doom, I'm a little bit unsure. The book writes about the Cursed Skies like it was a big and monumental thing, but doesn't seem to chat too much about the Skaven Doom, which is also a massive chaos activity. So I just assume it's the OG Pantheon saying, the rat stuff doesn't count, whatever. The last event done by a true OG, that's Bellacor, that's our big play. That's me kind of putting my own commentary on there, but there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of insight into what Bellacor perceives as the Skaven Blight. But we have this character, he is eternal, he's fantastic, and he is slowly building a cult of personality, as we mentioned before, adding followers to his roster. But what does falling into the sway of Bellacor mean or look like in a practical way? Well, for that, we can move to talking about his champion, Eternus. In short, Eternus was a vanguard leader of the 8th Circle who witnessed Archaon's moment of weakness that we spoke about in a previous video, where he lost his temper over a fort falling and killed 3 of his own vanguard. This warrior, named Ataris, saw this moment as representative of the Everchosen's weakness. He's like, not only does this plan go nowhere, but we're being led by an inferior leader? No. There's got to be something better out there. And so he starts to look out Bellacor as a new champion to follow. And it's here that Bellacor makes a dark bargain with Ataris. Become my champion, and I will make you powerful. Powerful by vanguard standards. And so Ataris agreed. After the events of the Cursed Skies, where the Stormcast Eternal souls are stuck up in the warp-filled skies, Bellacor took Ataris up there. And I'm just trying to imagine Bellacor lifting a vanguard and carrying him up to the skies. That must have been funny looking. And in a dark parody of the reforging process that the Stormcast Eternals have, Bellacor basically shoved the souls of Stormcast Eternals into the body of his champion. So just like lightning is grafted to Stormcast Eternals, they were grafted to a Chaos champion. Like the book even calls out, it's like a mockery of the Anvil of Apotheosis. They don't have a whole lot of detail about the actual ritual, but this is essentially the idea. He is Nega Stormcast. And when he came down, this vanguard was renamed Eternus, the blade of the first prince, which was also meant to mark Archaon. Remember, he just chose a champion, the Spear of the Everchosen, and so this is his take. But here's the thing. Eternus is still a vanguard, and like any vanguard, they can take gifts from chaos entities and still serve Archaon when he demands it, and Eternus does the same. But the difference is that now Eternus is using his position and his might, his newfound power, to essentially spread the gospel of Bellacor. So Eternus goes back to the vanguard. The 8th Circle is now full of traitors who are kind of getting disillusioned with Archaon and becoming more and more devout to this new character, or new old character, Bellacor. Eternus can tell them he's a better lord, one with a grander vision, one who does more actionable things than Archaon does. And so now, the Everchosen has the rot of treachery at his highest levels of leadership. And this is what I was talking about when we talked about Archaon and his moment of weakness and how I thought that was going to come back up. This is what I mean, is it seeded a whole second schism within the Slaves to Darkness faction, revolving around discontent of Archaon and the reverence of Bellacor. Now below Eternus, in terms of if we're ranking the different levels of Bellacor followers, they don't have like their own official hardcore hierarchy. But if we were kind of ranking them, right, it's him, it's Eternus as his right-hand man, and then below them, he has some minions that we're going to discuss now. The first one being the Centurion Marshal, which is a model that snuck past me whenever they did the last big Slaves to Darkness release. I was so taken aback by the Minotaur-looking guys and how beautiful they are that I totally missed the Centurion Marshal model. And they have very little in the way of lore, but it's interesting because all we really get is that they are Bellacor's enforcers, which I did not see coming. I thought they were going to be more involved with like the slave pits. But essentially, if Bellacor gets a group of followers in his area and he wants to indoctrinate them and turn them into a fighting force to join his armies, it's going to be a centurion marshal that disciplines them that way. Back at his base, Mordecai, he does have his own gladiatorial arena, and these guys are the pit lords of that. But really, if you want a true schism, you need loyal troops, and you can't rely on, proselytizing or convincing every slaves to darkness person individually. And so this is where he grows his forces. The pits pit them against one another to weed out the weak. Demons and mortals fight in what's called the mere pits. That's the pits specifically in Mordecai for fighting. And the centurion marshals act as guard, referee, all the kind of stuff of this madness. He keeps it all in line, separates the weak from the strong, and also kind of acts as a priest of Bellacor, not rules-wise, but in terms of he's an active believer, planting the idea of Bellacor being a supreme, manifestation of the gods, and doing so zealously in all the minds of their followers. The other unit he can take, which there is absolutely no lore on, are Chaos Legionaries. These are just mortals who have proven themselves to be worth Bellacor's time. And so this is essentially Bellacor's upper echelon, and now we're going to move to talking about the demons. And while there is not a lot of the way of lore for the demons that Bellacor can take, in fact, they just have the little one-sentence blurb that the app has, but I think it's worth chatting about the idea as a whole because it's just the characters that Bellacor can call to his banner. I mean, the Army of Renown is called the Legion of the First Prince. So it's him, being a unique demon-type character of Undivided, pulling all the demons together. So this is the army of usurpers and betrayers that are looking to dethrone Archaon, or at least change the dynamic that they're in now. I could easily see like Tzeentch demons not being super into Bellacor, but they're really happy to take down Archaon and that kind of thing. Which means that Bellacor and Eternus have been hard at work getting new followers, but on both sides of reality. Bellacor can speak to demons, Eternus can get the mortals. And speaking on Bellacor's recruitment, it seems as though the demons he can get are ones that have enough individuality to make choices for themselves, but not ones that are totally absent of thought. Remember, in GW lore, demons have sort of a spectrum they can work on with how diminutive they are to if they have a spark of sentience or consciousness. Things like Nurglings tend to be too mentally inferior to be able to convince. You're not going to convince a Nurgling to join the revolution. They're just going to destroy whatever's in front of them. You can convince a Plague Bearer to. And to that end, Bellacor built a legion of demons from across the Pantheon to support him when he needed it. And they all come to a head during that Broken Realms Bellacor thing. There's a whole inside war within the Slaves to Darkness. From Chaos Undivided, there's of course Bellacor himself. And there's, Furies, a few Legionaries, vanguard, that kind of stuff. From Khorne, he has the Bloodletters and the Blood Crushers, providing like the melee fist. From Tzeentch, there are Flamers and Screamers, but notably, no Pink Horrors. That's okay, Flamers are amazing. Who needs them? From Nurgle, he has Plague Bearers and the Beast of Nurgle. And from Slaanesh, he has the Fiends and the Hellflayer Chariot. All of these things can be pulled together along with their mortal, ancillaries or whatever, auxiliaries, and formed into the Legion of the First Prince, which is what he calls his specific armies. And so with Bellacor and his minions explained, let's kind of pivot into the way I like to end all these episodes. Why is this cool? Why is Bellacor a cool dude? Why do I like this so much? Well, to be honest, I love the idea of like hidden armies in battle tomes. And I think the Army of Renown rules that we've been getting really kind of highlight this. Of like, this is a very unique flavor of Slaves to Darkness. In fact, it's a very unique kind of army, period. Anytime you can take all the demons from the Chaos Gods, I know it's not all of them, but I mean like a sampling from all of them, meaning all four, that's interesting to me. It looks like it'll have a very flavorful and unique kind of makeup to the army. I don't know how good it is, that's kind of irrelevant for me. But what it represents is a new step in the story of the Slaves to Darkness. Because before Bellacor, they were a little bit one note in the sense that Archaon was just the sole villain, kind of like how Ushuran is to the Flesh Eater Courts, which is just, it's a character that all the roads kind of end at. He is your superhero if you play that faction. Of course you would want that model, he's awesome. But then when they added the Bellacor kind of subplot with his, divisions and his scheming, it became interesting for me because then Slaves to Darkness has more depth to it. People are actively conniving against one another. They're trying to usurp Archaon in real time. It's not just whispered about like it was in older battle tomes. And then they added the Dark Oath, which then adds a third dimension. Something that can have nothing to do with Bellacor or Archaon. And I just keep coming back to, a sentiment that I expressed earlier in the video. As I was doing the notes for this, it kept playing in my mind is if you are on the ground and you saw the cursed skies and you looked up, you'd probably think to yourself, why isn't that person in charge? Or you would assume Archaon did it and then be very surprised when he didn't. And in a faction where religious fervor tends to follow people who can demonstrate martial achievements, it's very interesting when someone takes a big step that is out of line like Bellacor did. Because you can say what you want about him not being, submitting to the authority of the everchosen, whatever, but he did good and he was right. Things are stagnating. It was a big step forward. In fact, the biggest step forward shy of the Skaven Doom that we had had up until that point. And then if you allow, your brain to say, well, he kind of inspired the Skaven Doom, it gets even more important. And so you can be a hardcore Archaon fan. He's the only one you like. You don't like Bellacor or demons whatsoever. That's totally cool, but you can't deny. The dude's making some plays, and I love it. We got a little bit of insight into kind of that schism mentality and some of the side stories that came out during the Broken Realm series. I would love to see a collection of those. Just a collection of short stories from Slaves to Darkness perspectives, or even demon ones, because we do have a few books where we follow demons. And just learning about, like, what does this schism mean to them? Some could take it as a religious angle. Others could do it as a, just a military power base or a politicking kind of thing. There's just a lot of different reasons why someone would side with Bellacor over Archaon, even though, when you step back completely, they are all part of the same faction. And if Archaon gives an order, Bellacor will do it. But we're talking about devotion over eons. Bellacor is happy to play the longest of the games because he himself is immortal. And eventually, if Archaon, fails to please the gods, they can take away his immortality because he's not a demon prince. He's just a dude. And so I would love to see stories where people kind of approach things with that mentality, right? What does a demon think of Archaon just being in charge all the time? They're like, that guy should be dead 10 times over. I love it. I would love to see more discussion, more dialogue from their perspective of just trying to wrap their heads around what we would call a multipolar world, right? Like where Archaon was the one pole, everything was balanced around. But now we have multiple sources of authority and power, and people who can get things done, or folks that we can trust to follow. It's very interesting. But I would love to hear your thoughts of the models we spoke about today. Do you have a favorite? I mean, it's not many. It's really just Bellacor, Eternus, the demons, and then some of the smaller units like the Marshal or whatever. I think Bellacor is awesome. I would adore eventually getting an army list where it's just him and a bunch of demons, because that to me is very interesting. I played demons in 40k many moons ago, and I liked it. I just, at the time, this was like, I think 7th edition 40k, it was kind of a mess of a game, so it was kind of hard to put together an army, but I loved the concept of it, and having that on the table just sounds fun. Again, it's a little bit more restricted than just an all demons army, of course. You can only take 2 units from each of the gods, but you got 2 of the better units that each of those gods has. Barring Slanesh, I guess. But like, Furies are incredibly annoying and very good for objective play. Bloodletters and Blood Crushers are both highly aggressive. Flamers are fantastic over in Tzeentch. I've heard good things about the Beasts of Nurgle if you take a lot of them. And then the Slanesh stuff, I don't really know much about the Fiends or the Hellflayer Chariot. But I mean, you got some good tools in the other sides of the toolbox. Not to mention you can throw in a few mortals to support you. There's just a lot going on. So my boring answer is Bellacor. My specific answer is the fact that he can take flamers, I think, is sweet. I thought it was going to be horrors and screamers, not flamers. But I'd love to know your thoughts. What would you like to see Bellacor do next? Do you want to see him continue his big power plays? Or would you be more content with having Archaon kind of be the sole hero and are okay with Bellacor being second fiddle? I would love to know your thoughts. Leave them in the comments down below, and I will chat with you later. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar video. Happy wargaming. Welcome, Wargamers, to our new discussion of the Slaves to Darkness, the most recent battle tome to receive the full treatment in 4th edition Age of Sigmar. These are the restless masses of chaos, the mortal followers of the Dark Pantheon, bowing before fell powers in order to survive and thrive in the hellscape that the mortal realms became during the Age of Chaos. Many are their tribes, and just as numerous are the reasons why any singular tribe would dare submit itself to the unholy pantheon. And what I want to say up front is that this battle tome does a fantastic job of giving us that insight. What would you do to survive? What deals would you make if it spared the lives of your children and your grandchildren? Conversely, how much would you sacrifice among those people to get back at the enemy who put you in this position of having to choose? Would you sacrifice your kids for the vengeance? Your future, your tribe? What's it worth? Because previous books have really painted this army, the Slaves to Darkness faction, as simply the iron fist of Archon, the Everchosen. And while he is, at this exact moment, the undisputed leader of the faction, more and more champions rise to the challenge and seek to sit upon his empty throne. Because really, when I look at it, this is the book of like 3 different stories. There's the story of the Everchosen's conquest, of heavily armored ranks of chaos warriors protected by blood magics and stuff. It's the story of the demon Bellacor trying to usurp that throne, but it's also the story of weakness and prey. Tribes that the wave of chaos has rolled over, and these ordinary people had to make a choice. You join or you die. You die as prey or survive to be the predator. And to stay safe as a predator, you need to stay dangerous. Make yourself such a threat that nobody else would dare see you as prey. Because there are always young upstart warbands looking to take your place in the food chain. And what you get from these stories kind of being compounded together is a heartbreaking story of survival and sacrifice and subjugation. People left and abandoned by Sigmar when he locked the gates of Azir. People who didn't wish ill on anyone suddenly needing to slaughter under Archaon's banner, or risk their homes and lives being destroyed themselves. And one thing I always loved in terms of the mental imagery that comes from early Age of Sigmar, actually an older Slaves to Darkness battle tome, I think, but the idea here is that the setting is not good and evil in a 50-50 split. The map is 99.999% blacked out, and there's a few pinpricks of light. Those pinpricks are the bastions of order. The rest of the map, the near infinite darkness, belongs to the wild tribes of the realms, who surrendered themselves to the dark gods ages ago. These slaves to darkness are the most prominent enemy in the setting. Around every corner, in every forest, swamp, tundra, burrowed into every mountain, are people trying to just scratch out a living, which often includes dedicating yourself to the gods for protection or power. And so in this video, we're going to discuss this basic questions, right? Who are they worshiping and why? What do they get for this? Why not, when, Sigmar's cities were founded, just go someplace better? These are the central questions behind one of my favorite factions in the mortal realm, and frankly, why I love discussing them as a subject. They are fantasy villains upon which you can ask some very important and reasonable questions. Why should they trust Sigmar? He left them. Why should I follow this other person? He destroyed everything I like. And so in this series, we're going to begin by breaking down the elements of this battle tome, going section by section and really diving into the units and the underlying ideas with them. Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar with the 4th edition, first of all, super welcome. Here is the best and most concise synopsis I can give about this faction, okay? In Age of Sigmar, there are 5 Chaos Gods: Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, and the Great Horned Rat who just ascended. Each of them is jealous over followers, corrupting mortals to do their bidding. There's an asterisk next to the Great Horned Rat because he's more interested in Skaven. But for the rest of them, this is why they have their own dedicated armies. the Blades of Khorne, the Hedonites of Slaanesh, and so on. They want to have their own followers. But one thing you have to remember is that collectively they are a single pantheon of gods. And so what if you didn't want to just serve one, to be a slave to a single one, but wanted insight and blessing from all of them, or simply just to not commit yourself? You didn't want anything from any of them, right? If you're a tribe that isn't terribly religious, you don't focus on the hocus pocus, and you kind of hold the gods at arm's length, all of those things, all of those kind of lukewarm, I'm not willing to dedicate myself to a single god, is sort of the idea collectively of chaos undivided. No single god, but we acknowledge them all as a pantheon. And a pantheon that we can call on freely. Like in battle, you can pray to Khorne for strength, and maybe give an offering to Nurgle when you're done with your task for, you want the endurance to heal or something like that. You can always ask the gods for anything. They might not give it to you, but you can always ask. The key here is to not be enticed any further to work for a specific god. So, for example, we gave one before. You're in battle, you say, I need the blood god's strength, or Khorne guide my axe, kind of a thing. Khorne will likely give you that strength because he likes seeing slaughter happen, but at the end of that battle, he's going to tempt you with more. Or refuse to offer it again until you dedicate your service. So, meaning you get this thrill of being, a merciless killing machine, and the next battle you go to and Khorne's like, you need to promise me more. In that case, your options are to simply walk away, back away and fight this battle on your own strength, or beseech a different god to get them competing against one another. Because now if you channel, say, Slaanesh, right, I want the speed with my axe, not the bloodthirstiness. After that battle, Khorne's going to be like, maybe I should rethink this. Maybe I should offer him the strength because I want him closer to me, certainly, than closer to Slaanesh. It is a push and pull of relationships between you as the worshipper and they, the pantheon, as the worshipee. It's a mix of indulging in your desires and temptations, but also resisting them through sheer strength of will. Because remember, they're going to keep trying to pull you further down their particular path. Slaanesh wants every single Slaves to Darkness to be a Hedonite of Slaanesh, and the same goes for Khorne with the Blades of Khorne, Magakin of Nurgle, and so on. And the life of an average Slave to Darkness is essentially taking the gifts that the gods offer in order to do more chaos, but rejecting soul dedication to any of them, no matter how good the gifts are. The person or character who best exemplifies this whole ethos of ambition paired with restraint is, of course, Archaon the Everchosen. It's his mortal legions that truly brought the realms down low. And he's a great example of this because all the gods on that pantheon really want to be the one in charge. We got a lot of main characters here, right? But the reason Archaon is successful on the grander scale than any other mortal is because he plays these gods off of each other to further his own agenda, while also demonstrating such grand achievements that even if the Chaos Gods are furious with him, they can't help but bless him. Right, if Nurgle's stuck attacking a fortress and he just cannot seem to crack its defenses and Archaon shows up and he does it, well, that means he obviously was the superior force. We should give blessings and resources to him. So he makes himself invaluable to the Chaos Gods, takes what he wants, but refuses to ever pledge himself. We're going to go more into Archaon in his own video, but his armies and the dedicated Chaos Guard armies that he's able to wrangle are essentially what made the mortal realms the hellscape that it is. As Archaon's forces swept over the mortal realms, all of the thousands of native inhabitants got swept up and incorporated into his war machine. You either show up, you join the party, or you get eaten. And to be honest, that's why I think this book has more flavor than the battle tomes for Slaves to Darkness that came before it. Because before the Dark Oath editions, we really only had one side of that story. I mean, we knew conceptually that tribes were out there getting swept up. There were a few short stories that involved characters like that. But on a tabletop, space, they were kind of just all consolidated generally to being generic marauders. Or the old Warcry warbands, rest in peace. But for the most part, it was just from Archaon's perspective, like this powerful subjugation, and everything else was kind of alluded to through units or lore. And while all of those stories are still true, related to the Warriors of Chaos section of the book, it feels like we've always had the perspective of the conqueror, but not enough of the conquered. Because in this case, getting conquered means pressed into service like all the Dark Oath tribes are. Otherwise, you're just erased. And the addition of the Dark Oath range, I feel, does a lot to extend the Warriors of Chaos narrative into new territories. Because when you step back, it's not really just about Archaon's Warriors of Chaos. It's not specifically a story of people making terrible choices and dark oaths. Those are simply political and military divisions, because collectively they are all slaves to darkness. There's different stories, perspectives, and narratives, but they share one thing in common, which is you're bound to something that is beyond your reckoning. Whether you are the war chief of a small hunting party, or a mortal manifestation of hell itself like the vanguard who lead millions, you are constantly weighed down and forever bound by the bargains that you made to survive this long and to get this far, whatever that might look like. Could be mutations that help you out, could just be an unnatural resistance to disease, something like that. Whether you sold your soul out because of a bad hunting season or losing a realm gate, you had to make some pacts to make it this far. And the only way to validate those choices is to A, survive, and B, keep going. Like with all the stuff that you're doing, and surviving means more deals, more bargains, more murder, more consequences. And so I love the term slaves to darkness for the army, because no matter who you're looking at, top of the food chain of Archaon or the bottom of the barrel when it comes to like the smallest tribe that a war chief could lead, all of them are under immense pressure to, one, perform for their chaos gods, but also to make good on the bargains that they already have, to justify why we need to keep going. And if you're kind of getting the idea here, this is an exceptionally lonely road to walk on. You constantly give up more and more of yourself to go further, to survive, to punish the ones who put you in this position, and it always ends the same way. If might makes right, then you need to be the most mighty. That means long life, supernaturally long, of making these kinds of bargains, bending the knee and abstaining, doing the will of the gods but spurning their enticing gifts as they try to lure you into their sole service. Only when you have enough blessings, clout, and sagas of success that one of these deities may offer the role of Demon Prince, which is essentially a mortal who ascends to demonhood with the blessing of a god. This makes you truly immortal. You are now perfectly immune to death, but not punishment. Or if that doesn't interest you, you can keep going further. Become the highest officer under Archaon and punish every level of authority that brought you to this point. It's just a different kind of survival with a different environment that these warriors are in. And one thing I want to back up and say here is that this overarching name for this cycle of dedication and reward while trying to spurn the gifts of what's being brought to you by the Chaos Gods is collectively called the Path to Glory. It can look like a lot of different things. It certainly looks different from one dedicated Chaos army to the next. Like the Path to Glory that a Khorne worshipper in the Blades of Khorne walks is different than a Nurgle follower from the Maggotkin of Nurgle. It's no different here. But the Path to Glory for Chaos Undivided is, again, making these deals with the gods, but never letting yourself fall to one completely. The only thing they have in common is that the goal is just to persist, if not thrive, in a chaotic world that you are now helping to create, which is sort of a weird, internal logic circle that I like. And to be honest, that's the note I really want to stress here in this first video, the first in the series. I try to make these videos so that if you watch the first video of the playlist, you'll have a good idea of what the army is like. And to me, the defining things are who they worship, the Chaos Gods, and then also the Path to Glory idea, because that's going to be something we see across this entire video series. We're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about Archaon and the Varanspire, the Dark Oath tribes, Bellacor and his demon usurpers. There's a lot of narrative with several heroes, named characters, different directions that the model range goes into as far as monsters. But no matter what we are talking about, right, from the bottom of the barrel, which is, in my opinion, the Chaos Spawn, all the way to the top of Archaon, all of them are on a single step within this path to glory. Everyone's on a journey, even if it's the end of it. The stronger someone is, the more weighed down by bargains and sin their soul is. But everyone, by nature of being in this book, is on a path of some kind. They're going to do war differently, have vague or non-traditional religious views, spread far and wide, and be all levels of sentience in the case of our, the Minotaur type dudes. Whatever it is, they're actively choosing to do whatever it takes to survive. Because they know that in every corpse they step over, in every spawn they pass by, and every skull that they add to the pyre, is just one other person who couldn't keep up with this fast-paced work environment. And so, the horrors persist, and so do they. Now, on the note of who they worship, this is an interesting one, and one that I've always liked, is that the Slaves to Darkness, you have the big five, right? I mentioned them before: Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and the Great Horned Rat. But the tribes of the realms don't necessarily view them in those specific five terms. For example, there could be like a tribe that, reveres their patron deity of like Papa Babadook or something like that. You just make up whatever name you want. And we know as readers that it's actually Nurgle, but they don't interpret it that way. Nurgle is not a name that's on their lips. They have their own religious order that is feeding the same energy to the same deity, but they don't perceive it the same way. And that's why I mentioned like odd religious beliefs, because you can have tribes that only worship a trinity, and they forget, say, Tzeentch and the Great Horned Rat, but they worship the other three. You could have a tribe where they know all five, but they just know them by different names if you want to keep it very simple. Or it could be like they favor one god and the others exist in the pantheon. So like Zeus is the most powerful of the Greek gods, but of course there's other ones in that same tier of power. It could be something like that. We see Khorne as, Odin, and everybody else is sort of a part in that story, or minor gods underneath him. And what this essentially does is just opens up all kinds of very fun story writing opportunities for us as fans. The only unifying thing about any given Slaves to Darkness army is that they are bad news for anyone else around them, including other Slaves to Darkness armies. Now, if you want to see what I think is a fantastic depiction of some of these smaller tribes, I would actually go read, I think it's called The Red Feast. It's basically the story of how Khorne comes into the Realm of Fire, and we get to meet the early mortal version of Korgus Kull. Now, while Korgus is a dedicated Chaos God follower, he's part of the Blades of Khorne, the book is great because the Chaos Gods have not entered the realms yet, and so it is a tribal culture trying to understand this unknowable horror that's coming down on them and the decisions that they make regarding it. Highly recommend that book, because essentially that's what every Dark Oath tribe does. Their beliefs, their customs, and traditions get either hijacked or twisted into something that fits with Archaon's goal, or some way that they can rationalize their religious views in spite of the slaughter that they're causing. What I love is that you can then start incorporating, we'll say previous or existing tribal beliefs onto stuff. So for example, what if your tribe really just regarded, we'll say, Nurgle, okay? And they regarded Nurgle very, very highly, but they see Nurgle as a plague bird, like a vulture, but the vulture acts like a phoenix, where it dies and has a cycle of birth and regrowth. That is very Nurgle-y. And you could kit bash your entire army to have banners of, the fetid bird or whatever you want to have it be called, and that absolutely makes sense as Slaves to Darkness lore. They'll call on Nurgle, and maybe there's some other minor god pantheons, brothers of this bird or whatever, that you can call upon or channel. But you can make all kinds of really crazy religious views, kit bash historical religious perspectives in our own real world with fantasy ones, and how, like the Phoenix as being an old tale from, the ancient world, really. But you can do that kind of stuff is what I mean. Make something fun, unique, and utterly and completely different. It gives you the levers to pull not only, the religious belief of this particular culture, but also how they perceive everybody else. And so I want to end this video, like I end all my videos, asking the simple question, why is this cool? What I love about this is that Slaves to Darkness as a book is the story of madmen making the world go around them go mad as well. right? And we get both sides of that. I feel as though the Bellacor, Archeon, and Warriors to Chaos vibe is about the madmen. And then all the Dark Oath stuff and the monsters are the effects of what they've done to the realms, turning the realms mad around them. And the two become one. They are a cohesive force. Certainly the model range looks fantastic, but I love that duality of perspectives now. And that's what I think the biggest addition to this book was. The Dark Oath stuff didn't distract from the Warriors of Chaos. It simply added to it by giving us more perspectives of those events happening in the realms and why people do what they do. Now, it would be wrong of me to end this video on Slaves to Darkness without talking about one of my favorite things and one of the most important aspects of the hobby to me personally. For those of you who may not know, back in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the game that preceded Age of Sigmar, there was a format called Path to Glory. It came out in a little white dwarf forever ago. I actually went and bought a copy of it just to keep on my shelf here. But the way it really works is that it was only exclusively for the Warriors of Chaos faction, and you would roll randomly to build a warband, dedicate yourself to a god. This is back when there was only 4. The Great Horn Rat hadn't ascended yet, and you and your friends would build these little warbands and basically have a little league of everyone trying to build their own Warriors of Chaos faction up and try to ascend. It's just skirmish mode basically for fantasy battles, but focused exclusively on chaos. This is what got me into the game, because in Jersey, where I was, there was a local store, and the store manager pulled like 6 boxes of Warhammer stuff, Warriors of Chaos stuff off the shelf, and had 4 of us all roll for it right there. And we built the warband and the armies as we could, as best we could. I did a terrible job. I got hosed real bad, but it was an incredibly important formative time of seeing factions grow and evolve around this singular character. Because in a sense, every warrior leader, whether you are a low chieftain or archeon, has to foster their own cult of personality. And so seeing these disparate forces that don't really make sense, but they make for super fun and engaging games, really tied and glued me to the Warhammer hobby. Now, that format was then expanded upon. It's been opened to all factions. Now Path to Glory is kind of synonymous with a progression system rather than chaos specifically. But that seed is still there. Like, the idea of the Path to Glory in name and concept is still distinctly Slaves to Darkness. It ended up being one of my favorite fantasy games of all time, and the fact that they continued that idea of this constant self-improvement, self-loathing, making deals, trying to get out of deals, whatever you can do to survive. It struck me really hard then as a kid, and I still find it striking today. But yeah, it was essentially the tale of building your warband, having mutations. It was all of the things, the concepts that exist in this battle tome just put into a skirmish format. And while that does sound super fun and cool, and I'm sure it is, this book has grown so far beyond that initial vision. Right now we're telling much deeper stories about the conqueror and the conquered, what it means to be abandoned by Sigmar, how that really messes people up, and what happens when you have to survive in a world where you are truly all alone. The perspectives are great. The new characters we've gotten that we're going to go into this week are all fantastic. I absolutely adore them. And the way that I wanted to split this series up here is I'm going to do a video on Archeon, the Varen Spire, or the 8 points rather, and then the vanguard, which will kind of take care of that entire tier of leadership. A video all about the Dark Oath and Bellacor, and then another one that has to do with like monsters, the odds and ends, and stuff like that. If there's something specific you would like lore for, please leave it in the comments down below, as I use these comments for, ideas for future videos. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Slaves to Darkness. Share this with a friend, and I will catch you in my next video. Happy wargaming. Welcome, Wargamers. Doug here from 2+ Stuff, and today we are going to be answering a question directly from one of my patrons, and it's a good question too, and it's all about Archeon and the nature of his chaos boons and mutations and all those kinds of things. So stick around for that. One thing I want to say right up here up top, if you like this video and you want to support the channel in any way, please consider becoming one of my patrons over on Patreon. These guys mean the world to me, and seriously, if you're a patron or a member here on YouTube, at any point you can shoot me an email or message me, and I will absolutely do a topic for you if you have an idea for a video, and there's enough to kind of work with in terms of content. These folks directly support me, the channel, my wife, our cat, everything like that, and it means the world to me, so thank each and every one of you. Now I'll throw the question up here, but I'm also going to read through it for those of you who are busy. How has Archaon not devolved into some kind of hideous chaos monstrosity? Is it like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons where he has every disease so none of them are able to do him in with that kind of like equilibrium? Do the Chaos Gods hold back the negatives of their influence on him so he can continue to operate? Which kind of hints that they would be aware of the end result of their quote-unquote gifts. Does he have the power to keep these various, taints and that kind of stuff at bay, or is he actually quite twisted, putrid, and ever-changing and we just don't see it because he's never without his armor? And this question is by Brian. So Brian, let me just go ahead and say, I think the theme that we're trying to see is what is the nature of chaos mutations, and then aside from that, how does that apply to someone like Archaon himself? Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar or Chaos Armies, I suppose really the big four, so like Disciples of Tzeentch, Hedonites of Slaanesh, Blades of Khorne, and Maggotkin of Nurgle. Those are the four that are aligned to specific Chaos Gods. Skaven are there, but they don't really mutate. But the core four, whenever they, see a follower or a disciple that they value, do some amazing achievement, rose in the ranks, did something to impress their deity, or did some grandiose act in their deity's name, they'll often give a boon. That is to say, a blessing of some kind. And these often start off as very, very small. It could be something like, you gain some muscle, maybe put on some poundage, that kind of stuff. Maybe you get a cool artifact or a familiar, so like a magical entity that kind of comes with you. There's a story of a Tzeentchian leader who gets like a magic bird that follows him around and kind of helps him navigate the world. One of the most common ones that you will see is immortality. So like not true immortality, but just you don't age anymore. And so you can still die if you're killed in battle, but it's like the Chaos God is saying, okay, you did pretty good, but let's see if you can keep this going, and just kind of keeps kicking the can as far as when you would die of old age. And so that's why some of these Chaos warlords, like say Korgus Kull from the Blades of Khorne book, he's hundreds of years old. He was there when Khorne first broke into Akshi back in the realm of chaos. And it's not because he, achieved some necessarily great heights, because he just kept impressing Khorne enough for Khorne to be like, yeah, let's see what else you can do. We'll keep it riding. And then he got bigger and stronger, and then he started to change. His muscular structure began to change a bit. He was given the boon, a gift of a flesh hound. And so in this way, when Chaos Warband leaders are what they call walking the path to glory, which is, your rise to stardom in the eyes of a god as you try to attain demonhood, which is the ultimate goal of all Chaos leaders, you get several gifts along the way just to, from your patrons to be like, hey, you're doing the right thing, keep going. And this is like one of the coolest, most unique things about, I guess, Warhammer historically, and that's for 40k and for fantasy and Age of Sigmar, all these things, is just the nature of chaos, the deities, and how they pour their blessings upon their followers. But it gets a little complicated from there, because that makes perfect sense, right? If you're doing something in the service of your deity, they give you a blessing. Where it gets complicated is, if you take too many blessings at once, you can fall apart. Like basically there are some people whose physical forms can't take the amount of chaotic blessings that they're trying to receive, and then if that happens, you turn into what's called a spawn. I did a whole video on chaos spawns. They're one of my favorite concepts within the context of the game. Really cool stuff. And that's just, you just become this gibbering mass of like constantly mutating flesh. You're basically used as like a war engine, but nothing else. You have no sentience, no mind. You probably have just enough of self in there to be in eternal agony, but that's about it. And then one step down from that are mutations that you're like, is this good? Like for example, like a Slaanesh hero getting a crab claw. It's like, why do I need a crab claw? I can't write with this. Or growing like obscenely long horns from your head. It's like, this doesn't help anybody. Now I need new helmets. You know what I mean? Like there are boons that are just straight good. And then there's this tier that are like just different. They have pros and cons. And then there is that final tier of like, this is just all bad. So with that being said, let's talk about Archaon the Everchosen. This is the preeminent mortal hero. He is basically a chaos champion that has risen through the ranks, and he's catered to the favor of each of the chaos gods to get what he wants, but he doesn't give them what they want. By this I mean, essentially, he started being a Chaos Undivided champion who was just kind of rising in the ranks, gaining glory, all these kinds of things. Nurgle would come to him and say, hey, if you work for me, I'll give you a ton of power. And Archaon's like, no, I'm not working solely for you. I'm working for all 4 of you. You're all going to give me your blessings. And I'm not going to pay allegiance to any one, like in particular, of the 4 of you. And then Khorne comes. Hey, I see you killing a lot of people. Looking good down there. Hey, listen, if you dedicate yourself to me and only me, I'll give you XYZ. He says, nope, I don't want that. I want all of your blessings. Again, he just repeats himself. And so what essentially is Archaon's thing is that he essentially does the bidding of all 4 of the Chaos Gods, because they all kind of want the same thing. They want the destruction of Order factions, the Chaos Realm poured into the mortal realms, but he refuses to give sole allegiance to any of them, so he pits them against each other in this way. Now you might be thinking, well, why don't they just stop giving him blessings, right? Like, why don't they all just get on the same page and be like, well, okay, we're just not going to support this guy, we'll go find champions of our own. And the answer is because Archaon gets results. He's not a normal champion who just goes around. He's collected a slew of artifacts, and his mount, Dorgar, is super crazy awesome, can like shapeshift and absorb things. Like, he's a super BA character, and so they all desperately want him on their side. So if Nurgle was to say, you know what, forget this, and kind of pull his blessings back or stop acknowledging Archaon, well, that leaves the chance that one of the other Chaos Gods is going to get him in service to him. And so all 4 of the Chaos Gods have to play the game with Archaon. They give him some blessings, some power, some influence, let him command some troops to achieve their ends, while at the same time, he has them all working for him. I'm taking these blessings, and I'm not going to pledge my sole allegiance to any one of you. So fundamentally, Brian's question is, how is he taking all of these blessings from Nurgle and Khorne and Tzeentch and, Slaanesh, but not changing? Because when you look at Archaon's model, he's just a dude, right? He fundamentally looks like a dude, riding a giant, awesome beast. And my answer to this, beyond like general inconsistency with how chaos things operate, I mean, that's the shortcut, right? It's just chaos is so crazy, maybe it just doesn't affect them. It's a very uneventful answer and very uninteresting. But there is always this possibility that, he is just so mighty, whether inherently or because of the artifacts he has all around him, that he has enough capacity, more so than the average person, to contain all these blessings. That's why he's so strong. It might also, we don't really know this because it's never really been talked about too much, but my understanding is you can deny blessings. So you can say no thank you, especially if you haven't solely dedicated yourself to one of them. So I think it is a matter of this balancing game of keeping checks and balances of like, well, I need to keep each Chaos God on the cusp of thinking that they're just about to lose me, meaning I won't work for them anymore, but they want me to work for them, so I'm going to take their blessings, and kind of juggling all of the responsibility and, potential backlashes from each and every one of them. It's so awkward to try and explain, because essentially it's like a relationship between 5 people, right? 4 Chaos Gods plus Archaon. And they're all, quote-unquote, paying him to do a job. The payment being blessings and authority over their followers and that kind of stuff. But he doesn't want to work for any single one of them. He wants to be a private contractor who charges all of them. And that's exactly what he does. And I hope that business thing helps kind of articulate his relationship with them. Now, the question here we have is, how come he doesn't, have 1,000 tentacles or like a bajillion eyeballs or a crab claw or whatever the heck? And we mentioned before, I think part of it is he is such a mighty character that he can contain the blessings. Maybe he says no to some. But Brian brought up a great idea. So if you haven't seen this Simpsons episode he's referencing, and I have, and I absolutely love the reference, by the way, there's a scene where one of the characters, he goes into the hospital and finds out he has every disease known to man, okay? And basically all the diseases are giving him positive and negative effects, and they balance each other. So he's like, oh, I'm invincible. And the doctor's like, no, even the slightest breeze could kill you. And he's like, I'm invincible. So he is theoretically immune to every disease because he already has them. And so in this way, I could see that being an actual interesting idea, because some of the Chaos Gods' natures, like Slaanesh and Khorne, are so polar opposite. What if you did take blessings from both? Do they not negate each other, because you still end up being stronger for having the blessings of two deities, but in terms of their mutations and how much they change everything about you, physically speaking, do those kind of cancel each other out? And that's a very compelling idea. I have no idea. I've never seen it mentioned before in any of the books. If you have, let me know in the comments. But I think that's a really rad idea. But I have one more to kind of posit here before we head out for the day, and that is this idea that Archaon has somehow achieved the ability to take in the blessings and exude them in his own way. By that I mean, Archaon, he is getting power from the four Chaos Gods. He's getting their troops, their followers. But when you read books where Archaon is present, okay, so there's a few Rumgate War books. He didn't show up too much in the Soul Wars, but there are stories where he's like, walking, fighting, that kind of stuff. His presence dominates everything in the story. Like, he has this aura of just blackness around him. So even though I say like, oh yeah, he's immortal, I mean, he is a mortal who exudes pure chaos energy. And I wonder, what if the various blessings of all four deities don't negate each other in his body, but sort of like if you've ever seen like a glass prism where white light goes in one side and the rainbow shoots out the other? What if it's the four Chaos Gods putting their blessing into the prism, which is Archaon, and pure black shooting out the other side, meaning he is truly chaos undivided, because he can do this juggling act with all four deities. When all four of their blessings come into him, the true nature of chaos is revealed, undefiled, unbridled by any sort of hubris from the various deities who are giving the blessings. So it's not Nurgle, it's not Cornate, it's nothing those things. It's just true evil. It's true chaos. Again, undivided. So it's something different. It's a fifth kind of power that none of the other four can create independently. Anyway, the prism thing, that's just my own way of kind of looking at it. Totally made that up. Let me know if it sounds stupid. But I do see that as kind of the way. It's like he's receiving something from every one of them, but what he puts out, this aura of darkness around him, the way he commands his troops, the way that he doesn't pay allegiance to any of them, it's just inherently different than anything else that the other Chaos War Band leaders are putting out there. And so it's my explanation of that uniqueness. That being said, I don't think he's going to take off his helmet one day and be like surprisingly handsome. Like, I'm pretty sure there's like some things going on under the armor. It's just nothing that's so crazy that it pokes its way out like a horn or a claw or something like that. But Brian, that's a great question. Friends, if you have any possible explanations, because I know there's like huge backstories about each of the artifacts that he has. And he has so many of them. It's so hard to trace down the old world books for them. If you have a more definitive answer as to how he can take blessings and not show any negative side effects, leave in the comments down below. Me and Brian would love to know, because it's a question that I think is fundamental to understanding Archaon, but also just the path to glory in general, as he is one of many champions walking along it. So leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to read them and I'll respond to you there. Thank you all so much, and a huge thank you to my patrons and channel members. I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming. Welcome, Wargamers, to the eternally damned mortal realms, because today we are talking about one of my favorite things in the entire, Games Workshop universe, and that is Spawndom. Now, for those of you who are new to AOS, or the faction that is like generally Slaves to Darkness, or Chaos, we'll say Grand Alliance, the Chaos Spawn is a somewhat aged and derpy model in the Slaves to Darkness range that shows up a few other places, Beasts of Chaos being a great example, and it represents the fate of a Chaos champion who's failed to please their god, or took too many Chaos mutations, or they call them gifts, at once, and their physical form could no longer contain them. There are, of course, other ways to become a spawn, like spells from sorcerers, or getting too close to the realm of chaos, that kind of stuff, but those are the major ones. Now, a chaos spawn is actually a little hard to describe, because they are by nature indescribable horrors, right? And so this is a problem when it's like, you have a model, but the model doesn't necessarily represent the idea. And really, to kind of give you the idea that they're trying to go for here, this is what it looks like when the ever-changing and mutating forces of chaos are brought into mortal flesh. These are slavering monsters without true form. Bones are constantly cracking and reforming into new shapes. Eyes will randomly burst from the skin and look around ominously. Tentacles, barbed hooks, all that kind of gross stuff. Again, in constant flux. So what it looks like one day may be totally different from the next. And again, this is one of those times where I just don't think the model can possibly do the concept justice. There's so many variations into Chaos Spawn. We would need crab claws and spider legs and random limbs and mouths that only scream in pain, huge rents in the skin where ribs are being crumbled in, and so on. I really hope I'm painting the picture for you of how cool a spawn is. It's absolutely horrifying. Now, one other thing to know is that Chaos Spawn do tend to be rather large. The muscles on them are constantly growing and expanding before collapsing in on themselves, where new ones are grown and expanded. And that's really why they're kept around. They are big, they have a lot of physical strength to them, and they are expendable because nobody really cares about them anymore. Oftentimes a Chaos Lord will have a couple spawn chained up and guarded by his followers, partially for amusement, as we will discuss in a moment, but also because these are somewhat easily accessible monstrous brutes, and they can be thrown at the enemy with disregard. You just throw him in your first wave of troops, don't care if he dies, he's going to crash in and do an immense amount of damage and fear. Slaves will usher it to the battlefield and then pretty much just unchain it and try to run away so he doesn't eat them, but he's just gonna go straight towards the enemy. And the damage that he can do is not just in terms of physical destruction, which is a lot, but it also strikes fear and confusion into the combatants as well. And frankly, it makes a lot of sense to have one in your army. If you don't have war machines or anything like that, these are very useful to smaller war bands or minor warlords. But there is so much more going on here than a sick, nasty unit with a Reagan era model. Chaos Spawn are a constant reminder for the price of failure, and that's exactly how it ought to be. The notion of a path to glory where a champion begins to focus and please one or more of the Chaos Gods is worth it because the ultimate prize is demonhood, right? You become more than just a man or a woman. You become the stuff of the gods, truly immortal, renowned, and glorious. But to draw only the greatest into this game, there needs to be consequences. And that is essentially what Spawndom is for the most part. When a spawn is being held by a warband, they just kind of have it captured up for a weapon and that kind of stuff, it is intended to be a real-life, tangible reminder of the price of failure, a warning sign for the weak, and a honest threat to the strong. And it's not like some random person in the warband turned into a spawn all the time. What if your Chaos Lord falls to Spawndom? Well, then all the lieutenants are going to fight amongst themselves, but eventually someone's going to end up on top. Now they're in charge and can sit and look at the last guy who had their job, and the weight of that is always meant to be on the champion's mind as they're seeking favor. It naturally shakes up how a warband functions. A new champion is dubbed, and they have to stare at the price of who their predecessor failed. Now, of course, this is an example of if Spawndom is given out as a punishment for failure. However, Spawndom is also a reminder of what happens when mortals drink too greedily of divine gifts. We get the sense from a few stories here and there that the human body can only handle so much mutation at once. Once you cross that line, your form just kind of crumples and you become a spawn. And I imagine this is why we see a lot of stories where you'll see the words like a champion received too many gifts is kind of the wording that they use, and then turned into a spawn, even if they didn't fail, even if they did something grand and glorious, if they try to take too much for themselves, they fall apart. And my reasoning for this is that I think the perfect champion is meant to be one who only takes what he or she needs. A strength boost, longevity, maybe a weird limb change, I don't know. But inviting too many of these blessings from your god is a sign that you think you need them, right? It's just a weakness. I can't do this without more blessings. When the truth is, a true champion of chaos needs nothing more than a sword or axe. Now, of course, that's not the canon explanation, but that's kind of how I see it. I mean, we see the phrase, took on too many gifts and turned into a spawn quite a bit. That's my understanding. And it's also how you can get hardened warriors who have changed and morphed over time, like say Korgus Kull, that haven't fallen to Spondum. I think it's because he takes gifts very, very irregularly. They just let you take everything you want, but if you can't handle it, it's on you. It's your weakness. Now, one of the things that makes this fate, no matter how you got there, so scary, is that Spawn can think. Well, I mean, they can think sort of. They are wild, uncontrollable beasts by nature, writhing in agony and always trying to feed and so on, but it's made very clear that there's just enough sentience of the former mortal in there that they can grasp the hellish prison that they're in. They feel the pain of like their ever-changing body, and when people attack them and then chain them down and beat them, they also feel the shame of defeat. So like, they're in their prison and they know that they have failed the gods constantly and that this is their living hell where their former champion is trapped in their own body, and that body isn't doing very well. And so you're looking at the oftentimes previous example, let's say your warlord who got turned into a spawn, that example we had earlier. You wouldn't have reasoning or communication skills, but you would probably understand enough to feel incredible amounts of physical and emotional pain, and likely enough sentience to see someone else sitting on your throne, taking command of everything you worked hard for. And so, to me, this is the ultimate insult for anyone who walked the path to glory for many years seeking demonhood, is watching somebody else take your throne. Now, of course, like I said before, there are other ways to become a spawn, like spells and that kind of stuff. And in a lot of those, it's just like, I feel like there's not as much of a story element as far as like how somebody got there. You know, it's not very exciting to be like, yeah, and then a spell just zapped him, right? But when you put that kind of fate into a narrative of a champion on the rise or a champion that greedily takes too much, well, then all of a sudden that transformation has a lot more going on. There's depth to it all of a sudden rather than just being like an offensive spell. And so like with all my videos, I want to end this by just talking about why is this cool. The idea of chaos, to me, is the most original thing about Warhammer. Certainly when they were still doing stuff with Warhammer Fantasy Battles in the old world. I know a lot of the elements from that game are inspired by other media, and parts of this one are too. But as I've said before, the core idea of a champion starting a journey that may last centuries, it may take them all over the realms and will certainly change them, is so enticing because it has both the ultimate prize for success and the ultimate consequence for failure. I love that the Chaos Spawn are this constant reminder of the devil's bargain these champions have made. There's something about seeing the end of someone else's story right in front of you. And yet, all of the Chaos Lords and Chaos Sorcerer Lords and everybody, all in their own heads are like, man, sucks to be that guy. Glad that'll never happen to me. Which, of course, you and I, as readers, can look at this and be like, that is absurd. You are dancing on a tightrope, my friend. So few people make it to become a demon prince, and so many champions end either, just randomly in death or being turned into a spawn. Now, ultimately, there aren't any long-term effects of spawndom on the realms as a whole. It doesn't, mutate the ground around them or anything. On a grand scale, spawn are pretty limited. It's limited to that champion or victim that was turned, making them a footnote in a larger tale. But regardless, I love the idea ever since I first saw it. I do remember reading a very old White Dwarf. I believe it was early 2000s, 2002 I think is when the first Path to Glory dropped, and I just had an absolute blast reading about how you could turn into a spawn, and I was like, what are you talking about? That is the single greatest thing ever. When I was playing Beasts of Chaos, my favorite, of course, was Gave Spawn, and if you're not familiar with that, you basically get a free spawn model when your heroes die. So if your hero gets struck down, no, they're not dead, they've just taken on their new glorious form, and so they perceived spawndom as a phoenix rising from the ashes, right? I wasn't killed, I was just reborn, and that's just a crazy, weird way to look at this terrible, terrible fate. I'd love something like that for my Slaves to Darkness. Maybe we'll have something like that when Path to Glory gets redone with the Battle Tomes going forward. I do expect, based on what we've seen for Crusade and 40k codexes, that Path to Glory is going to have some major narrative expansions for your faction to add a lot of flavor to them. So certainly I think Spawndom, Demon Prince, that kind of stuff, I really do feel like that's probably going to be rewritten in a big way. But friends, I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of Chaos Spawn? I mean, honestly, as a 50-point unit or whatever, I don't know what they are right now with the new points coming out, I think they're baller. Like, they're just a great little objective holder. You got a 9-inch like sphere around them that keeps anyone from coming onto the board or deep striking or whatever you want to call it. Everything about them is random, so they could either be the saddest spawn who moves like no inches and does nothing all game, or they can be an absolute powerhouse. And speaking of powerhouses, can we just talk about how the first time that we all saw them in the video game Vermintide 2, like we just collectively needed to go change our pants because we crapped ourselves because they're terrifying in that game, way more so than anything in the tabletop. But man, what a fun experience to see them in motion. And I do actually want to end this with a question, not just inviting your thoughts about Chaos Spawn in general, but I actually want to ask you, what are your favorite alternate models for Chaos Spawn? Now, if you leave a link down below, it's going to flag it for potentially being spam. Just tell me the name of the website, I'll go check it out. But I'm actively looking for alternate spawn models because, like I said, I don't think the GW one does it justice at all. I mean, I'm sure it was a great sculpt back in the day, it just doesn't hold up very well. And I think it has a very narrow focus of like showing you what a spawn could be, whereas like different writhing masses of flesh and bug parts and all these kinds of crazy things I think could go a long way to sprucing them up a bit. So let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming. Welcome, wargamers, to the unforgiving mortal realms, where morality is as gray as the twilight realm of Ulg-Hish, as we point out a story that absolutely gripped me, and I hope it does for you as well. Today we cover the story of The Abandoned, a brutal chaos warband found in the Slaves to Darkness battle tome that highlights a moment in Mortal Realms history that I find absolutely fascinating, like a point in time that I want more stories about. And while their entry is fairly short, it's gotten me so excited to paint my Slaves to Darkness, which I've sort of very loosely based on them. I'm not going to call them The Abandoned, but it's kind of the idea behind what I was going for. And so, without further ado, let's dig into it. Our story takes place back in the Age of Chaos, but it's certainly towards the beginning of it. Chaos has poured into the mortal realms in real numbers, and across Akshi, the realm of fire where our story takes place, demons and bloodbound are running rampant. Now, if you've seen my lore video on Akshi, you know it was a realm full of tribes and kingdoms, right? Some were rather primitive, following like these primal ancestor gods and living nomadically, while others were incredibly sophisticated city-states that reached the pinnacle of arcane technological prowess. And it's the drama between these factions and tribes and kingdoms that Khorne used to enter the realm. Now, one such faction to feel the brunt of this was simply known as the Kingdom of Sol. I couldn't find it on the map of Akshi nor reference to it in any of the story bits, but there are many such kingdoms. Like I said, it's a location, a realm that is full of these very, very different sizes and styles of kingdoms. And the Kingdom of Sol was led by King Khalid Kolmen. The people of Sol had enough distance from the initial slaughter, of Khorne really entering the realm in force, to kind of see what was happening, right? The writing was on the wall, and they saw there was no hope for them if they stood and fought. At this point, the Battle of the Burning Skies had already occurred. Sigmar has lost Galmaraz, and has declared to all that he is closing the gates of Azir. Now, I'm not really sure how that, proclamation was made so that random kingdoms out in the middle of nowhere could get it, but I'm assuming he, put it out into the void and all their sorcerers and scryers figured it all out. Seeing the tide of demons begin to approach the Kingdom of Sol's doorsteps, King Kolmen calls for a mass exodus. We have to get to one of these gates to Azir. Now, knowing what we do about people, I'm sure this was an incredibly hard decision, right? Many hard decisions were made because there's no room for being slowed down. If I'm this king and I have to make this decision, immediately a few things come into my mind, right? What do you do with the regularly sick or infirm people, or the elderly, or the too young to walk, those folks of your empire? What happens to them? How heavily do you travel? Is it one big caravan, every man for themselves? If it's everyone for themselves, how do you maintain order? Because now, you're moving away from your kingdom, and, kind of like the lines of power are getting blurred because now you're all refugees. Not to mention that I'm sure there was like a portion of their population, because like I said, we know humans who just wouldn't go. They were like, my granddad built this wall and I'm not leaving it. Those kinds of people. Not to mention the cultural impact of leaving a home, right? A kingdom's worth of people without a kingdom of their own. I'm sure some thought that the king was a coward. Others said they had no choice. The point I'm getting at here by going through all these is that there's so much wrapped up in the decision to flee that when we look at stories that have like whole Duarden Karaks destroyed and cities ransacked, like I get it. I understand why people wouldn't leave or why they'd squabble about leaving so long that it just became too late. But nevertheless, the decision was made and the flight begins. Now we don't know exactly how long the travel from the Kingdom of Sol to the nearest, Gate of Azyr took. Again, we don't have a map, but we do know that only a few thousand survivors actually made it to the gate, which just from the name of the region, the Kingdom of Sol, tells me that was probably a very harrowing journey, right? When I hear a kingdom's worth of people is kind of picked away until only a couple thousand make it, that has to be brutal. Khorne warbands were hot on their heels. I'm sure things like ambushes were a constant concern, as is water and the difficult environments of Akshi. And so the story snippet we get here does make it seem like Khorne armies were bearing down on these refugees right as they finally reached the gate they sought. And just as the king reached out to go through this doorway to Azyr, its lights flickered and it went out. The Kingdom of Sol had missed its opportunity by mere moments. The gates of Azyr had closed and would remain so for centuries. And with this, the last sons and daughters of Sol had been doomed inadvertently by the God King. Now at this point, it's over for these guys, right? They have nothing left. Enemies are bearing down on them. They're ragged. They're, torn apart from all the travel. And I cannot imagine the level of heartache Coleman felt. All that hard decision-making we talked about earlier was built on the trust that Sigmar would have a door for us. He was their hope, and everything balanced upon, and then he failed them. Falling to his knees, King Khalid Coleman cursed Sigmar, and he called out to the Chaos Gods, offering his soul, and the souls of his people, for a chance at vengeance, to one day walk upon Azyr just as they intended, but this time to repay Sigmar for his failure as a god. And the Chaos Gods heard him. Now, we don't know if it was a specific Chaos God or if they each, kind of threw out a bit of power into the pot, but, they're capricious. They sometimes do that kind of stuff, but these gods heard the king's prayer, and unlike Sigmar, they stepped up to the plate and delivered. Again, probably for amusement rather than actual care. Suddenly, all these ragged and beaten survivors of the Kingdom of Sol swelled up with power and energy. Flesh went from weak and malnourished to unnaturally strong, bulky, and rippling with dark power. It's true, the Chaos Gods had heard their prayers, and even though, they threw these guys a bone, you have to remember this is still chaos, right? And now these were slaves to darkness, which meant a constant struggle to survive. You have to keep proving your worth. So, they're kind of interested. They're like, I'll see where this goes, and they throw some power at these, shredded up refugees, and now they have to take that and prove themselves champions. So I say that to say that rather than being graciously absorbed by, the Khorne demons that were on their tails of oh, you're chaos now, we're cool buddies, the people of Sol slaughtered their pursuers with their newfound strength. And I point this out because it's easier for people to say well, why'd they fight the demons? And it's man, the ruinous powers are constantly plotting against one another and seeking champions that have to prove themselves in battle. They're again, I'll give you a little bit, but you need to make that work. And so he did. And with these newfound blessings, they turn on their pursuers and slaughter the Khorne forces to the man. Having survived their ordeal and bound themselves to a life of servitude, King Khalid Coleman of the Kingdom of Sol creates a new identity for his reborn people. What were the refugees of the conquered Sol are now known as the Abandoned. and would lead a life of slaughter and mayhem that painted them as some of the most intense, prosecutors of Sigmar's faithful. Every shrine to the God King needs to be desecrated, every believer tortured until they see that their God's never coming, just like he didn't come for the Kingdom of Sol. He couldn't even keep the door open. And so that's it. That's the lore blurb, and I just fell in love with it. So let's take a break here and talk about why is this so cool. It's such a great story, right? It's not too over the top. Nothing happens here that is so, abstract fantasy, all this crazy stuff. It's not hard to fathom, and I imagine, happened to several people. The doors had to be closed at some point, and while it's truly tragic, some lives were going to be sacrificed to keep what little containment Sigmar could do, right? When he makes a decision, I need to close the door, that immediately sparks the fact that some people are going to be left out. We're on a timetable. And I can look at that and be logically, okay, I understand that, some lives are going to be locked out. I get it. But what if it was my life, right? Where the cold, hard logic begins to break down and it's just tragedy. And it's simultaneously both. It is, mathematically the correct thing to do to cut off, people fleeing into Azir, but then also it is equally a tragedy. I don't think that this, shows Sigmar as being evil or anything. The second he announced that the gates were closing, a timer started. And anyone who wasn't there when the timer went off was just straight up out of luck. I get why it had to be done that way. But I also get why villains and warbands like the Abandoned can be born from that kind of moment. And something here I wanted to kind of tack on at the end here, right? Even if they got through, we know this as readers, but they don't, it was not going to be easy street. When we went through the Cities of Sigmar lore in their battle tome, the second that those doors closed, all hell broke loose in Azir as Sigmar went on a rampage, the only way a god can, to purge any hint of chaos from those who made it through. Now, seeing as how the king in our story gave himself to chaos immediately after being denied safe harbor, who's to say that the same, weakness of conviction wouldn't see him purged along with thousands of others in Azir? Everything everywhere was bad, and it was bad because of chaos, or bad because the good guys had to do ugly things to contain the chaos. And honestly, that's why I love this story, right? It has such an understandable motivation and a clear story arc as how he started, how he ended. And mixed with that info we have here as readers that the king wouldn't, as far as what happened in Azir once the doors closed. But hey friends, tell me your thoughts, right? What are your thoughts as far as, did he make the right call in fleeing for the gate? Would it be better to die faithful or run and then have his whole story arc happen? This is exactly the kind of stuff that I love for warband stories. So let me know your opinions in the comments down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you all so much for watching this lore video and I hope to catch you in my next one. Happy wargaming.